January 16, 2018. We'll have a pledge of allegiance. Today, we're always standing.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, do the roll call.
Here.
Councilmember Marciano.
Here.
Councilmember Debris.
Here.
Vice Mayor Simmons.
Here.
Mayor West.
Here. All right. That works. Public comment. This is a comment for anything that is not on the agenda. You get 3 minutes. We can't respond because it is not agendized, but we can ask questions, we can comment, and we can put it on an agenda for a later date if so desired. First thing I'm going to say is that I went this last weekend about 9 rounds with the flu. I think I won, but I'm not too sure I won. So if I look stupid, it's because the flu has got me. So any public comments?
Round one then.
Oh, she's going to confirm that I look stupid. Okay.
I live on 5 Donner Street. Good evening, City Council, Mayor, City staff. Happy New Year. I'm here tonight for the Historical Society, on behalf of the Historical Society, to tell you that we need to save the date for the city's sesquicentennial in 2019. In November, I'm going to read my script just so I don't forget anything. In November, a legislative intern for Assemblywoman Ana Caballero contacted us stating she'd been tasked with finding the incorporation date for the city of San Juan. She had found sources online that claimed the date was May 4th, 1896. I think she transposed the numbers. But she wanted to confirm with the Historical Society. We knew that date to be incorrect, but after a quick search of the archives of the Luck Museum, we determined the actual date to be September 6th, 1869. So we have here, the Mission News did a nice centennial edition. We have a number of copies of these, but it was a big deal. Tony, were you here then?
In September 8th?
Yeah, my picture's in the upper right-hand corner there. Smart aleck.
It was a big deal. They had a parade, they had fireworks, they had a dance, they had entertainment, open houses. But San Juan did things really big in those days. And this is the Centennial souvenir book that the Historical Society published that same year. It's got a lot of the vintage photos. We have a lot of these at the museum that we'll be selling. We got even more when the property was dispersed, when they donated the rest of the materials. Anyway, so in a subsequent email, Assembly member Caballero, scheduler and legislative aide, asked if we had a date planned for the celebration so she could save the date. I told her that I'd come to the January meeting to propose that the city form a sesquicentennial committee and celebrate the city's 150th birthday on Saturday, September 7th of 2019. And then I would let her know, and then she could pencil it in. I think we need to let all of our state, local, and state legislators know. I was really surprised that they came forward to us. Anyway, I can share with you all details about this later, but the committee chair at that time was Ray Gervais. Did anybody know him? He owned the San Juan Lumber Yard, which is on McCollum, where the pottery barn was, the pottery shop. That's abandoned property now, I think. Anyway, the headquarters was here in City Hall. Anyway, there's a lot to think about. I think you might want to agendize it and set a date just so that we can let people know and start planning. Another significant date in 2019 will be held on February 2nd by the Historical Society to commemorate the 100th birthday of the building at the corner of Luck of 3rd and Monterey, originally a gas station, now the Luck Museum, home to the Historical Society. The building the entire block was donated by Francisca Luck, when her father passed, expressly for the purposes of having a library, a museum, and a park. And Carrie Pierce, you know, the Pierce Lane, longtime family in San Juan, he is going to be president of the Native Sons of the Golden West this coming year, and he's going to, with the help of Brenda, give us a commemorative block and plaque. And he wants to arrange the commemorative event that February 2nd. That building belongs to the city.
February 2nd this year?
February 2nd, 2019.
2019, okay.
So we'll need everybody's input on where the rock should go. Certainly it should not go near the portico, under the portico, but maybe near the bell. So next time you're out and about, you might check that area. This book was published by Plow. He wrote the book, but he used the San Juan Bautista Historical Society archives. Page 113 and 114 covers the centennial celebration activities. So if you have this book or if you want to borrow a copy. And we did give the Posada, the La Posada Inn, or the, what is it called? The hotel on 3rd Street. We gave one of these books for each of their rooms, and then he's bought some to sell to customers as well. So that's all I have. Save the date.
Thank you.
And we're available for help. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the commemorative rocks are not what falls off the trunk. All right, any other public comment? All right.
That lady back there got her hands
Yes, ma'am.
up.
I didn't fill out one of those forms.
No, just come up and then fill out the form at the end of when you're thing and get it in, as long as the clerk has it.
I had a resident that lives here that asked me about
Could you state your
Oh,
name?
I'm sorry. My name is Shirley Brewer, and I live at 400 San Juan Hollister Road. About the distance from the fault line to a well that's drilled at Copperleaf, and I didn't know the answer to that. I was wondering if there's anybody that could help me out with that, because they've dug a new well that's pretty close to the fault line.
I don't know, Ed, would you?
I don't know those precise dimensions, but I know it's beyond the 700-foot limit, and therefore lawfully located.
It looked to me like it was about 25 feet, as opposed to the, this is a map that was done by Tom Dibley, an engineer, and so I thought I would come before this body and ask if indeed Copperleaf was doing what they're supposed to do, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment? Oh, and do get one of the things to fill out, the clerk. Consent items. We'll move on to consent items.
Move to approve. Second.
Any questions? All those in favor? Aye. You got to do that, not me. Sorry, I told you, flu, brain dead.
Councilmember Bach,
Here. There, aye.
Councilmember Freeman,
Aye.
Councilmember DeVries,
Yeah, aye.
Councilmember Marciulana,
Aye.
Yes, it's okay. All right, it's okay. We're going to move on to presentations, number 4. And I want to make one change here. Normally we have the presentations, and then under number 6 we have the action items on those presentations. I'd like to move the action item to each time, so we have the presentation, and then we take an action while it's still fresh. Everyone's fine. Has anybody got a problem with that?
No.
All right. The first one is fiscal 2017 audit.
So, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, this is the annual independent audit. We've contracted with Jolly and Associates. This is Mr. Ryan Jolly, who has been involved with the city's audit for a number of years, and he's prepared to make his independent report.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, and members of the City Council, for having me here tonight. I just have a few brief comments, and then I can answer any questions if you have any. As mentioned, we issued our audit opinion on the financial statements of the City of San Juan Bautista for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2017. We once again issued an unqualified opinion, meaning we found the city's books and records to be in accordance with generally accepted generally accepted accounting principles. The word unqualified is a little weird, but it's basically a clean opinion. The city's finances are actually in very good shape. You guys have a general fund balance of about $4 million. For the size of your city, that's actually quite impressive. It's probably better than any other city I audit. So, city is operating efficiently. The enterprise funds, the one thing we've talked about in the past is the due from the enterprise funds to the general fund. That's now on a payment schedule and is being repaid to the general fund with interest, and the city made its first payment on that last year. And on page 10, if you look at the operations of the enterprise funds, both the water and sewer are actually also operating. You can see almost break even, but a large part of that is of the expense in each of those funds is depreciation expense, which accounts for about $620,000 in total between the two funds, which is a non-cash item. The city is paying back its debts according to its planned amortization schedule, so there's nothing out of ordinary there. Also, regarding the 2015 enterprise revenue bonds, the city has met its debt covenant ratio that's required for that as well, for the revenues that are, or for the net revenues that are required to be met for that bond. Actually, your debt service was 1.71 times, which is what they require is 1.25, so you're quite a bit over that amount. Also, we issued another report at the end of the audited financial statements on the internal controls of the city, and once again, we didn't identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies with the internal controls. Lastly, we issued a management report for the board of directors, or for the city council, and there were once again no exceptions to any of those items. Those are some standard disclosures, letting you know that we didn't have any difficulties encountered during the audit. There were no unexpected problems. We didn't have to consult with any other outside specialist. So basically, the general representations, we didn't have any uncorrected misstatements. No significant estimates. So once again, overall, just a very clean audit opinion. We appreciate Ed and his staff for providing us with everything we need and helping us perform the audit, and just appreciate the opportunity to work with the city once again, so thank you.
Any questions from the
questions?
No, sir.
Any questions?
I do have a question. I was waiting for the really hard questions, and I thought I had an easy one. About how much interest should we earn on $5 million that we have that in the bank?
Well, right now, how much you should or how much you are earning right now?
I'd like the answer to both.
Right now, you're not earning much, being in just the general bank accounts. I don't know the exact interest rate, but I know it's less than 1%. Another alternative is LAVE, which I did talk to or Ed and I talked about that, because you can earn probably at least 1% more than you're getting right now. So that'd be $40,000 to $50,000 of interest income. That's pretty much.
My calculations say 58.6.
58,000. Yeah, that could be obtained by just merely moving those funds from LAVE.
So the LEAF effective yield off of their website today is 1.239% with an average investment life of 186 days. You're going to know more about that than I do. And they have $21.2 billion in assets under investment.
Yeah, no, I definitely, every city I work with, and I'd say 90% of the special districts all invest, money into LAVE, so I don't feel like there's any undue risk by putting your money there. So.
Members of the council, we've made reference to LAIF. That's the Local Agency Investment Fund. It's a state pool that's managed by the state treasurer. It's both state funds and, as it says, local agency investment fund. Most local agencies, in fact, I know of none that don't put money in so-called LAIF. The city of San Juan does. We have $64,000 in LAIF. I think the question that Councilmember Freeman asked, if we put more money in LAIF rather than a non-interest-bearing checking account, could we make more money? I think the answer is yes. You have an investment policy that establishes an investment advisory committee comprised of the mayor, the city manager, and the city treasurer. And I have brought to the investment advisory committee a proposal that we consider expanding our use of the local agency investment fund so as to increase our interest, and we're working our way through that recommendation.
And I did a little further investigation. I sit on 2 boards within this area, and so I felt like I could call and ask them. And the Water District of San Benito County keeps their money there, their money. And AMBAG, the Metropolitan Transportation Planning Organization for the Tri-County area, also keeps their money there. So I'm going to strongly suggest that as soon as possible. I mean, because every day we go by, there's several thousand dollars, or several $100s of interest that just kind of float away.
Any other questions from the council? We open it to the public hearing?
I have a question.
No, you don't.
Can you explain why we have $4 million? What that $4 million is doing? Seems like we have needs in the city. I was wondering.
It's actually not doing very much right now.
Is that money set aside for something, or?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
I would suggest that's probably a better question for the budget review that's coming up later in the agenda.
All right.
As opposed to as part of the audit. Strictly speaking, it's not an audit question. Is that all right, Bob?
Fine.
Okay.
Any other questions from the public? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to move to
6A to accept
6A.
the audit?
Yeah, so we can do that now. If I get a motion.
Yes. So moved. We need a resolution?
You have a number on that?
Pardon me? Do we need a conversation, or
What?
does this warrant further comment or conversation, or do we just?
Nobody has it? Instead of going to what I want to do is try to get it
fine.
following right on the heels of it, so it's fresh in everyone's, maybe because my mind is frozen.
Move we pass a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Juan Bautista accepting the San Juan Bautista Municipal Audit for fiscal year 2017-2018.
And the number on that would be?
I'll second that.
Tony seconds.
Thank you. We call for the question?
Councilmember Box?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Freeman?
Yes.
Councilmember DeVries?
Yes.
Councilmember Martirana?
Aye.
Mayor West?
Yes. Move on to the treasurer's report.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it has been your routine to have the city treasurer present a report to you which includes results for the past month. In an earlier meeting, recall we had a conversation about how we might streamline the agenda, and you tasked me with the task of trying to come up with a way to better and more easily convey the good news of the past month's results. We haven't quite done that yet, but we have the narrative from the treasurer's report and the warrant list, which is your tradition to review for your consideration. And part of the reason why we didn't give you the current month's numbers are because we have the annual audit, we have a proposed budget, there'd be all kinds of numbers to review. The narrative suggests that in all respects, save one, we're better off than we had anticipated at the time you had adopted the budget.
All right. Any questions on that?
No.
My only question would be the one I just brought up 5 minutes ago, and suggest that we can add an extra $58,000 to that budget and be a little bit better off. That's
Is that
it.
a motion?
Duly noted.
Do we need a motion?
I think it's done by your committee, so I can't do that.
Well, yeah, okay, thank you.
The suggestion was that if we increase our investment in the Local Agency Formation Commission, we ought to be able to generate more interest income for the balance of this year and certainly for next year. So as you consider next year's budget, which will typically be presented to you in mid-May, you want to be looking for the annual estimate of interest income. The $5 million of cash approximately that is available to the city in all funds is available for investment. Some of it should be retained for checking, so not all of it should be placed in LAIF, although LAIF does have the benefit of 24-hour accessibility, so it's highly liquid as well as being safe. So we want to talk with the investment committee about how much of our cash should be invested in LAIF, and whatever that proportion is, you'll see it reflected in next year's budget.
So it is secure and it is liquid?
Oh, yes.
Good. All right. Do we need to, I got this thing? No. All right, that's duly noted. Let's see, monthly...
So unless there are questions, you could accept the treasurer's report.
Yes. Do we need a motion on that? No, we accept.
I have a couple of questions on the warrant list.
Okay.
Four-leaf is the building inspectors, is that correct?
Yes, and we show on the warrant list that we've paid Four-leaf $4,300, and that's for building permit, plan check, and inspections.
And that C&N tractor is repair of the backhoe?
That's repair of the Kubota backhoe, yes. It was a transmission. It's a $5,000 transmission.
I know the feeling.
All right. Report, monthly construction progress report for the city.
Pretty straightforward.
And members of the council, this is the monthly construction report on the two ongoing subdivisions that you've asked us to prepare. There's no particular action. If you have any questions about it, we could address them.
Any questions on the board?
No, sir.
Any questions from the public? All right, we don't need a motion on this. The next one is...
And Mr. Chair, subsequent to the preparation of the agenda, but it's just for presentation purposes, we did receive the sheriff's quarterly report that's required under the contract. A member of the sheriff's staff is here to present that report if you wish. In fairness, he only got that assignment about an hour and a half ago, so...
So is it the consensus of this board to have that report?
I don't think, it doesn't sound like we need to have a presentation on it. We have the report, we have questions that can be addressed. Appreciate receiving it in time for the meeting, but...
Do you want to make a report? All right. All right, report on city council appointees to regional organizations and committees. Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Good evening, council, mayor, citizens of San Juan Bautista. Like was explained earlier, I was just given this. I'll try my best. First time I've done it for this city. This is the quarterly report for the city of San Juan Bautista, the fourth quarter for the dates between October 1st and December 31st of 2017. You've been given a copy of the outcome of the 3 months. From what I can tell on the agenda that was given to me for the entire 3 months, 42 incidences have been documented in a graph, ranging from anywhere from traffic vehicle accidents to property crimes and some domestic disputes. Unfamiliar of what you are requesting or needing to know. I know there is a point in this prop where public is to comment. I feel I can answer some of the questions if I can. I would gladly do that for you if you have any questions regarding what you see on the agenda in front of you. and if the citizens have any complaints or concerns that I could possibly address in a quick way for them, I would be glad to do so.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from this council?
No, sir. I'm just wondering, what is part 2?
I knew that was going to come up. A Part 2 crime is basically anything other than what's not listed on your sheet, which could be anywhere from a barking dog to a flag down that was somebody waved us down and asked us something. It varies. That's why it's an open one that's probably not listed on your agenda.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the council? Any questions from the public on this, from the sheriff? Yes, please.
Aside from the concern...
Can you come up to the...
Rachel Ponce, 4th Street. Aside from the concerns of the speeding on 4th Street, I've noticed that there's U-turns being made at 4th and what is that? Is it Mission? Right there at
Right by Vertigo?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's mentioned.
Yeah, there's U-turns being made there. People leaving from Vertigo's and making U-turns there. And I don't think that's a very safe thing to be happening.
I can tell you that the sheriff's office, a directive from the sheriff through our captains has been given to us. We have heard the concerns of the citizens regarding the speeding, the inadequate stopping of stop signs. I can tell you personally, I worked today. I issued 3 citations here in the city for failing to stop at stop signs. I have not noticed the U-turning, but I will address the other patrol units on the shifts as they come in to be on the lookout for that as well. So I understand that is a concern for you, it is a concern for us, especially on the weekends when the city is a little bit more busier. I noticed that they did, the city has repainted some of the crosswalks or all of them at some point. I readdressed it with earlier in 2017 that the city probably should do an annual right before school starts every year, that they do the stop limit lines on the ground with the word stop and the white line, because that does play in a part of when someone takes a traffic citation to court. It does make it has a play in it. So just to reiterate, making sure that the signs and the grounds are marked properly and more visible. And for the U-turns, I will address that with the rest of the patrol.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jolene, you have a question?
Yeah. Jolene Cosio, 181 Lang Street. Also, I was noticing some 2 or 3 years ago, the Boy Scouts redid a whole lot of the red curbs, but not downtown because the city didn't feel it was safe for the Boy Scouts to work downtown, and said that the city workers would take care of that. It's never been taken care of. There's a lot of red zones that would help out a lot if he wanted to issue a parking ticket, say, near an intersection or near a fire hydrant. And the other thing is, I should have checked this again, because it was about 2 weeks ago. I went to the sheriff's website to look at the incident reports, where you've always been able to go and look to see, why the cops were in your neighborhood 2 weeks ago. It looked like, some big deal, and there'd usually be a little report on that. It was blank. You can click on the dates and all that, but it was blank. Has there been a problem with that site? Thank you.
The first comment was the red curb.
Yeah, that's really for us to deal with. That has nothing to do with you guys.
Right, and I addressed that as well at the same time I did with the stop limit lines. The red painting needed to be done. So I addressed that earlier. The website, from what I understood, we had a server problem at the county level that has prevented this generation of the report that you may see blank. Also, our online reporting of non-emergency that citizens can self-report, not just with the city of San Juan, but with the entire county. I will make contact with Captain Taylor and find out if our IT has fixed that for you guys. I don't know if it's specifically designed just for the city of San Juan or if it's a county-wide issue. Based on the program that we have for report writing and what you guys have been given, it's not just specified for the city of San Juan Bautista, it's a county-wide computer system. So I'll look into that part of it for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, no other comments? So now we'll go on to report from city council appointees to regional organizations and committees. John.
I'm up first? Well, okay, so there wasn't any water board meeting in January. I did go to an AMBAG meeting last Wednesday. They're pushing the municipalities and the counties to try and, if we repair a street, if we fix a street, if we redo a street, and we're using SB1 funds, we're supposed to, praise it a lot, give it a lot of free advertising, or whatever word you want to use, phrase you want to use, because there are political movements, particularly in Southern California, to try and derail this, and one doesn't look like it's going to make it on the ballot, and the other one looks like it will make it on the ballot. So, they're in peril, and we need to be aware of this. And so, if we do repair a street, we need to sing those praises and something like that. That was really it for AMBAG.
Thank you.
COG is still, our more or less main focus is on the sales tax initiative to repair streets and make improvements. And that's one of the things that came up, John, was that if SB1 goes away, everybody's remark is, oh, well, there's SB1 and you raise the gas tax, but that doesn't come to San Juan. Yeah, I mean, the gas tax, a little bit of it, but so the COG is going to very actively try to get this proposal or sales tax passed at the 2018 November election. That's about it.
LAFCO, we just had, we picked new chair and vice chair and cleaned up a couple things, but nothing really related.
The Intergovernmental Committee did not meet, and I unfortunately was not able to attend the Fire Committee meeting.
Well,
You were there.
I forgot about the Fire Committee meeting. I was attended that.
You just wanted to forget about it.
I just wanted to forget about the Fire Committee meeting. It was the Fire Committee meeting. We had a report on a JPA to find out who was going to be in and who was going to be out. And we're going to head to, we're punting right now. So there was nothing really to explain. Ed, you were there. Do you have anything to add?
Well, for the benefit of the community, the three agencies, the County of San Benito, the City of Hollister, and the City of San Juan, commissioned a consultant to conduct a study into the feasibility of various options for how to organize and govern fire services in the county, obviously with the goal of providing better service at the same or lower costs. The consultant prepared an initial report and presented it to the advisory committee, and the advisory committee, as you suggested, is punting. I think it's more fair to say this advisory committee is trying to figure out what to do with this report next.
Correct. All right. So we have a report from the Strategic Plan Committee report.
Okay, so the strategic plan, do you want to do it, Shauna, or I can read it too, but.
I'll have to borrow it from you.
That was in here.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Our Strategic Planning Committee met on January 4th, our first meeting of the year. Several items on our agenda. The most significant was likely our decision to develop an annual work plan of items that we want to address each year. What we've been doing is we use the general plan implementation matrix and then identify items that have been input into that matrix to make some decisions on what are we doing, we've broken up into 5 subcommittees, and what our subcommittees are going to address. Well, we don't really have any kind of planning mechanism, honestly, of how to approach all that, and so we've been addressing things that maybe weren't in the matrix, and some things that maybe the council doesn't necessarily want us to be focusing on sometimes, and so with Ed's support and direction, we came up with a kind of a template sample form that we're going to actually implement at our next meeting to help us decide, okay, what should be our priority items each year. And then we want to present that work plan to the council for your concurrence to help us move forward with implementing some of our projects. We also have another item on your agenda, which I won't talk about because I'm going to present it to you a little bit later. And we did have several members of the public. We did have gentleman Seth Capron from the city of Aurora, or I don't know if it's a city, I guess it's just...
He lives in the county.
Yes, the county areas, who presented some information to us on clean energy, I believe. I missed that portion of the meeting, but John can probably elaborate on that.
He talked about Monterey Bay Community Power, and he talked about working with several governmental agencies on developing additional solar capabilities, and nothing firm is in the works yet, so we'll just leave it there.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
I'm here for any questions.
Any questions from the board?
Thank you.
Any questions from the public on this? Seeing none, we'll close public hearing. Move on to public hearing items. A, statewide communities infrastructure program.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is an item relating to the Rancho Vista subdivision. It's listed on your agenda as a public hearing because it is required to be noticed in the newspaper and opportunity available to the public. My suggestion is that this is a financing program for subdividers to use to pay fees. We'll talk more about it in the staff report regarding Rancho Vista, so my suggestion is that you open the public hearing, see if there are any public comments, keep the public hearing open, and then we'll address it in turn as we go through the Rancho Vista item.
All right. Any comments from the council?
No, sir.
We're going to open it to the public hearing, to the public, and if you have something with that, we'll keep it open.
And of course, we'll have public comment on each of the Rancho Vista items.
Yes.
I have a public comment on it. I thought, Bob Quaid was, I thought this was brought up previously, and I'm not sure why it's back again. So.
We didn't take any action.
We didn't, well, I'm just not, I don't know how it benefits the city, so I'm just wondering when there's more discussion on what the benefit is to the city.
Sure.
All right. We're going to move on to the next item.
So we'll leave that public hearing open.
Yes.
And there may be additional comments as we present further information.
Okay.
At 6C, I believe, the agenda.
All right, well, we've done 6A on the fiscal audit. We've done 6B on the budget. We have not.
No, we have not.
We have not. So we're going to do the budget, the 2017-2018 update.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we've provided you with what we're calling the mid-year review of the budget. You adopted a budget last June for the fiscal year that ends June 30th. With about half a year's worth of experience under our belts, we wanted the opportunity to review the major revenue sources, the audit report, which you have heard earlier, and make some accounting structural changes. No significant changes in the budget are being proposed, other than a few that I'll mention now. The first is to recognize higher fund balances for the various funds, including the general fund, as the beginning point. So the budget is how much money do we have on hand, how much will we take in, how much will we spend, what's left over. We are starting with higher fund balances than had you anticipated 6 months ago. And we were reflecting that in the budget document that we presented you with this evening. Specifically, and a question was asked earlier, you heard our auditor say that the general fund has a fund balance of about $4 million. That's on page 5 of the audit. And you didn't ask him further questions, but he would have said 1.8 million of that fund balance is what's due to the general fund from the water and sewer enterprises. Recall that the general fund loaned money to those enterprises. They're paying it back in accordance with the schedule. So 1.8 million of that fund balance is with the money those funds owe us. The amount that is undesignated, ready to spend, is about $2.2 million. That's reflected in this budget. You have an adopted budget reserve policy that suggests how much you ought to set aside for emergencies, how much you ought to set aside for cash flow. This exceeds that, and my recommendation to you is that when you consider next year's budget, you carefully review your budget reserve policy to see whether it ought to be, some of the reserves ought to be used for one-time capital expenditures or for modifying other revenues or staffing. You have the luxury of choice because we have a strong fund balance in the general fund. So of the amount that is available to be spent, it's about $2.2 million, Mr. Quaid. 1.8 million of it is the amount that's due to us from the sewer and water fund. So that's one of the changes that are revised in the mid-year budget review. The second kind of change is to look at the specific changes in the staffing pattern that you've adopted over the past couple of months. As you well know, you're talking to him. You have an interim city manager, which has a different employment arrangement than did your prior city manager. We've recently appointed an assistant city manager. We've lost a staff person who was the director of community development. We've replaced that with contractors. All of those changes are reflected in this revised budget for your consideration. A third change is, as I mentioned, is to establish a new accounting structure that will provide transparency for the use of some of the reserves. A year ago, we would have told you that some of the general fund was reserved for future replacements of buildings and vehicles. And that was, in technical term, a designation of the fund balance. Rather than having that slosh around in the general fund, we thought it better to create new funds for the replacement of the buildings and vehicles, specify it, show where it is, and when we need to spend it, we know what we're taking it from. We're not taking it from the general fund. We're taking it from the specified purposes. In an earlier conversation with the mayor, he suggested that, as I was talking about the public funds, we have so many different funds. He said, well, you can only spend it out of one pocket. You can't spend it out of every pocket. Well, ours is like a fisherman's vest with dozens of pockets, and we have to carefully account for each of those special revenues and spend them only in accordance with the law. We think it's important for transparency to have these reserves for building and vehicles set aside in a separate fund, and that's this budget proposes to do that. It also creates the establishment of a new fund called the Community Development Fund. This is, and the accountants would call a special revenue fund. The revenues would be the payment of building permit fees, building application fees, building inspection fees, engineering fees, planning and zoning fees, all the fees that are related to private development. And the expenses would be the cost of plan checking, building inspections, the planning and zoning review, the construction inspection, the review and approval of public improvement plans. And by creating a community development fund, we can match up the revenues attributable to private land development with the expenses attributable to land development and not have them mixed up with other general fund purposes. So it adds some complexity to the budget structure by adding a fund, but it allows us to more clearly focus in on the kinds of expenses and match them up with revenues. And the final revision to the budget is to recognize the various capital improvement capital improvement projects that you had adopted previously, but to now put them in the right funds and to show the revenues that are going to be paying for those capital improvement projects. Frankly, it would have been possible to be more aggressive in estimating the revenues to pay for some of those projects, like, for example, our wells. But we only we took the amount that we think we're going to spend this fiscal year and matched it with the revenues that we think will come in this fiscal year. How could we be more aggressive? The two subdividers are hopeful of beginning models at least, and maybe production units before the end of the fiscal year, and they will be paying fees. So we've only, in this revised budget, been very conservative and only accounted for clearly identifiable revenue sources to match up with the capital improvements. So no particularly, in my view, significant changes to the budget other than to recognize the new fund balances, to revise the revenue estimates for sales tax, property tax, and the transient occupancy tax to reflect our experience for the past 6 months, to create the new accounting structure, to account for the staffing pattern that you've adopted, and to match up the capital projects with the capital revenues. If you adopt this, it will provide the framework for your consideration of next year's budget, which will have, I hope, more narrative and more description. There were 2 blanks in the budget message. I promised I'd get this to you on January the 16th, and then a number of us, including me, got sick, and we missed 2 blanks in the budget message. On page 2, for example, in the middle it says the beginning fund balance of the Community Development Fund is $162,700, not XXX, $162,700. And the beginning fund balance, going back to Mr. Quaid's question, the beginning fund balance in the general fund represents 159% of last year's revenues. So it's a very healthy reserve. With that, I'm available to answer any questions.
So I noticed that sales tax dropped a little bit and our TOT went up considerably. More than enough to make up for the sales tax, actually.
As always with these things, you need to, what are you comparing it against? Last year's actuals or last year's guess? So last year's guess was considerably less than what we're actually receiving in the transient occupancy tax. The property tax is greater than last year's actuals, and sales tax, based on the data we have so far, is slightly less than last year's actuals. I'm not confident in forecasting what that will be because of the way sales tax comes in. It is doled out by the state each month. The first 2 months of a quarter are estimates, and then they true up in the third quarter, and sometimes they're behind. Sometimes certain businesses have special arrangements with the state to delay reporting. So based on what we received for the first 6 months, we believe that our sales tax revenue will be about 6% less than it was in the prior year. More than offset by the increase in property tax and TOT, but it would be less. But I'm not confident in that number.
So, this probably is not necessarily a budget-related comment, but we need to stimulate commercial growth in the town to build that source of income back up to better than it was. My hope.
All right. Any comments from the council?
Ed, is there a page in here that shows what's in each one of these sinking funds, or is it just...
Yes, sir. It should be one of the early schedules. It's right after the narrative. It's called budget summary. And all we did was take the money that you'd previously approved and move it into these funds. So the sinking fund for building rehabilitation and replacement is $71,300 was the beginning balance. You're going to transfer an additional $49,000 in this current year.
Show me what page it is.
Right here.
Tony, it's the first page after the text.
Oh, okay.
And the vehicle replacement fund has a beginning balance of $91,000 with additional fund transfers of $56,000.
And then, I think it should be explained, and Mr. Quaid asked the question, we don't really have $4 million in $100 bills sitting in the bank. We have 2.2.
In $100 bills?
1.8.
That's correct. We have $1.8 million in one pocket, which we can't spend yet because we haven't earned it, and $2.2 million in another pocket.
But could we put that in the
Yes. Yeah, well,
No, not the 1.8.
there's a different question. We talked about fund balance, which is, in budget terms, the amount available to be budgeted in that year, $2.2 million. The city's cash position is a different piece of analysis. The city's cash, all funds, for all purposes, is about $5 million. And some of that could be invested in the local agency investment fund. Today, of that $5 million, $64,000 is invested in life.
Good opportunity.
Any other questions?
Very happy to see this, very happy to see us updating and joining the 21st century in our accounting. Thank you very much.
Agreed. To go to public hearing? Yeah. We're going to open a public hearing. Anyone has a comment on the mid-year term budget? No? We'll close the public hearing. Do we need an action on this? Yes.
Yes.
Approve it. We need
It would be appropriate to consider a resolution approving the revisions to the mid-year budget. So,
I move we pass a resolution in the City Council of the City of San Juan Bautista amending the San Juan Bautista municipal budget for fiscal year 2017-2018.
Second.
Wait. Call for the question.
Councilmember Bach?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Freeman?
Yes.
Councilmember DeVries?
Yes.
Councilmember Marquardt?
Aye.
Mayor West?
Yes. All right. We are now at C, consider recommendation of the Strategic Plan Committee for a Parks Master Plan Task Force.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Shauna Friels, the Chair of the Strategic Planning Committee. I didn't mention that before. I'm here tonight to present you with a recommendation from our committee. The City Council referred the concept of development of a Parks Master Plan to us for review. Our committee met beginning of January on the 4th, and discussed the ideas that had been, I think they had been proposed during a town hall meeting and then here at the council level. Part of our discussions were actually led by Mayor West and another member of the San Diego County Parks and Recreation Commission, who were very active in development of the Parks Master Plan for the county. They give some solid input on processes and best practices and so on. So what our committee's recommendation is to the council this evening is to allow us to have our existing Strategic Planning Committee subcommittee that's already been focused on Parks and Recreation, have them partner with the people who attended the town hall meeting to develop a Parks Master Plan task force. That task force would identify strictly the Parks Master Planning process. We don't believe it's necessary at this time to really develop a separate Parks and Recreation Commission. We just don't really have the manpower, if you will, to have so many committees and commissions to address one thing. And again, our Strategic Planning Committee has been addressing recreation for, since 2013, 14. That is our recommendation to you tonight, is to allow us to develop a Parks Master Plan task force made up of members of the Strategic Planning Committee and those members that attended that town hall meeting. And then they will make recommendations to our full Strategic Planning Committee and then present those to the council. We anticipate this being probably a 3-month process. It could be a little bit longer, but at least in 3 months, we'd like to present something to you as a council to give you an idea of kind of the planning of it, how would it work, what would it work. So that is my report to you this evening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Shauna. So a task force implies that there is a task, and the task in this instance would then be the development of this master parks plan.
Correct, yes.
And then it seems to me that once developed, a master parks plan, there needs to be master parks plan implementation and master parks oversight and so forth. So would part of, I'm just trying to understand the vision here. So task force committee comes up with a master parks plan. Plan is now presented. Looks great. Now, what's the next step in terms of making that a reality? Was that going to be handled through your committee, or you're going to address that at that time, cross that bridge when you get to it, that kind of thing?
I believe that's part of the Master Parks Planning Initiative itself, is how do we implement this plan? How do we develop the plan? What's in the plan? And how is it implemented? By whom? It may bring us to that place where maybe there is a Parks and Recreation Commission that's necessary.
Okay.
Or maybe it can be facilitated by the Strategic Planning Committee's Recreation Subcommittee.
Okay.
But I believe, and possibly Mayor West can chime in on what the county's done.
And the county also has an organization called REACH, which is kind of like Friends of the Library. The library that raises money for that implementation, because otherwise they rely completely on the county for that money, and when times get tough, they cut the parks.
Yes, recreation is cut often.
Yes.
So that's my understanding, is that part of that task force job is to identify all areas, implementation, what is going to be in the plan, what is the plan, how would we implement it, what would that time frame look like, those sorts of things. Similar to any other master planning process.
And then once implemented, then would your committee make recommendations on how the whole concept of parks in the city of San Juan Bautista is overseen? We're all familiar with the TV show Parks and Recreation, right? They had a, whatever city that was, I guess in the Midwest somewhere, they had a whole department, and Amy Poehler was in charge of it somehow. Pawnee, yeah. So in Pawnee, they had a whole Parks and Recreation department of city employees just to oversee Pawnee's parks. How is San Juan Bautista going to oversee its parks?
I believe that's part of the whole planning process.
Okay.
How does this work?
So it's development of a plan, and then just how is the city going to develop, maintain, and run its parks?
Implement.
That's all going to be part of your deliverables on this?
That's my understanding.
Wow, that's a big undertaking.
It is.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, that's why in about 3 months, we believe we'll be in a place where we can at least give you more of a timeline, how this will play out.
I was going to ask you about that too. So 3 months, in 3 months, deliverable is just an overview. Here's what we think needs to happen for the council to say, yep, sounds good, go forward.
Right, sort of a check-in, I believe.
A check-in?
Was my understanding.
A last question, what opportunities would there be for the public to participate in a parks conversation at one of your meetings?
Terrific. Very good question. We did talk about that in quite length. We would like to hold outreach meetings with the public, additional town hall meetings, because these are the public's parks, right, and recreation activities. So we'll do, all of these meetings will be in venues that are open to the public, places where people can come and help participate in that whole process.
And well advertised with social media and other newspapers and other things, right?
Yeah, whatever social media we have, I don't know what we have here than Instagram, but but certainly we will do the best we can to get this out.
Yeah, and the only reason of course, I kind of started, I think, the conversation on this stuff, and it seemed like it got a lot of public, response.
Yeah.
People feel very strongly about the parks, and there's a lot of real positive energy behind it. So I think if it is advertised and promoted, I think you'll get a good turnout, would be my guess.
And this is a long time coming for all of us. We know this in this community. It's a long time.
It's needed.
Yeah, the county Parks and Rec master plan took 4 years.
Wow.
Gosh.
Okay.
That's a huge county.
It's kind of a
It'll
big
be much
county,
easier for you.
That's our recommendation.
Any other questions from the council? No. Any questions from the public?
I feel very confident under Shauna's leadership that this will come to fruition. Shauna, I don't know if all of you know, but has been very instrumental in the strategic plan production. Her committees have been very productive and I know that it will be a good thing for San Juan to have this kind of organization take this over. And Shauna's organizational skills are very good, and she will definitely bring about results that are needed and in a very positive way.
Thank you.
Monday's a snowy. Good evening, member of the strategic plan and specifically the subcommittee, recreation. The first meeting for this proposed Parks Master Plan Task Force is the 23rd of this month at 7 p.m. So I will be creating a Facebook event on the What's Going On San Juan page. So for everybody who's a member of that page, you'll be able to see that event. It is open to the public. We do have an email list that we've received. Thank you to Councilmember DeVries for providing that. And so those who left their contact information at the Vertigo meeting have received an email invitation specifically for this meeting. That will be happening next Tuesday the 23rd. So if anybody would like to have that email, the location is at Credo Studio, 1 Polk Street, right across the street, at 7 p.m. on Tuesday the 23rd. And we are creating the agenda that's for the subcommittee, so if anybody has any comments, or please if you could reach out to me before the end of this week so that I can have all that. The other thing is, as far as the deliverables, I had a question, because definitely I do agree that having the Master Parks Plan be a part of that deliverable process, but then also any action steps, because I know that there has been direct questions by certain community members of proposals for specific parks. And of course I'm talking about the dog park that's been talked about and that's been brought up multiple times. So I'm just wondering, as far as the Strategic Planning Committee giving a recommendation for having a general plan, how would you the council suggest that we move forward, as far as if we're going to be, if people are coming and saying, yeah, the Master Parks Plan, that's all well and good, but what about the dog park? I want to just have clear direction with the council of how you would like that addressed. Because I know that it's been on agenda multiple times, and I've been contacted directly at strategic planning meetings and otherwise on what we're planning to do about creating a proposal for locations for a dog park in congruence with this Master Parks Plan.
I can take that one.
Is that convoluted? Does that make sense?
I think it's the expectation of the council. Certainly my idea was that individual park assets would be addressed in a master parks plan.
Okay.
So that'd be a dog park or a fish park or a horse park, whatever kind of park is on this master parks plan, be identified, potential locations, all the stuff that would go into a master parks plan would be captured in that process.
So that's including assets that are currently in the city's holding, not just proposed new sites, but possible uses of current parks that we have already.
Absolutely. I think the starting place is what do we have now, what current assets are under the control and management and ownership of the city, what opportunities are there for future parks, and feasibility of that and so forth. What do you have now? What could we have in the future?
Okay, because what was brought to my attention was a specific request to designate an area to have a potential dog park, and then kind of through community organizing efforts to be able to fund that not necessarily, the funding we wouldn't seek that from the council themselves, but just like, if we have this idea for a kids park, this idea for Abbey Park, this idea for a dog park, can you designate that use at the specific location? Would that be considered as delivered? Because I'm just thinking about time, right? If we're going to take 3 months to make the whole plan, but we have a specific use where we could
Yeah, you're not taking 3 months, I didn't hear you're taking 3 months to deliver the plan.
Okay.
You're taking 3 months to deliver to us your proposal for what the plan, how you're going to get the plan together. Whoever's asking you to make a recommendation to designate, that's going to be way down the road, I think.
That's right.
I'm learning, so I'm zapping.
Yeah, no, you're just taking input at this point, and then it's getting everybody together to collectively make a recommendation to us about what you think should be done with all those assets and what direction we should go in terms of budgeting or trying to find new opportunities. And I mean, to me, this is pie in the sky. We've got a whole bunch of, we have some assets now, we have some unutilized assets, some heavily utilized. John made, I think, a great proposal for a person to coordinate, recreation activities, youth recreation primarily in the city. That's what we want to hear. Does the community feel that is a priority? And if so, that's what we need to hear so that we can figure out how to pay for it. Or go back and say, we're going to do a community effort to raise the money. But to me, it's pie in the sky. It's a clean slate. You guys got to just collect a whole bunch of input and see where the conversation takes you.
Okay, so yeah, just I would appreciate any and everybody's involvement on the 23rd of January at 7 p.m. at Credo Studio, and to voice their opinion, because that's going to dictate where this goes. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Jolie.
Seems funny just to walk up without having to fill one out, but you seem to be good at recognizing us when you stand up, so I guess Jim must know everybody. Anyway, Jolene Cosio again. This all sounds like a great idea, and I actually missed the meeting where they were discussing this because I'm also on the strategic plan. But I do want to mention, because when I hear social media, I tune out. That's just me. I would like to see them also make an effort to get it in the Voice, the Mission News, the local paper, and possibly have it on the city website if that's possible. And then it's really up to council, planning commission, whatever, to make sure that only one or two of you attend, or you don't say anything if you do attend, to avoid Brown Act things. But I do hope that the city is going to have some involvement in this process, because down the road, obviously, you're going to have to designate a public works person for it, or hire another person, or something. I mean, of course, it's going to come down to money eventually, and that's something that the strategic plan doesn't really have any control over. But yeah, I think it's great that they're going forward with it, and I'm glad to see you involved, Jim, because you've been involved in the county process, and I think it'll be a good process.
Thank you. Any other comment?
David Medeiros, First Street, Sonoma Batista. I was just going to make a recommendation that whatever committee, whatever group is putting this together, to reach out to the youth group and ask them for their support, perhaps to get involved with it. Also, if we're going to talk about recreation or park spaces and what have you, how about the Mission Plaza to be included as part of the plan, what we're going to do with that, and also that portion which faces 3rd Street, Main Street.
Comment. Thank you. All right. Okay, are we done with that? Are we done with the motion? We don't need a motion on this.
No.
Understand. Okay, we're going to take...
I think we are asking you to make a motion, I believe, to allow us to develop the Parks Master Plan.
You're right.
I think we need consensus direction. I would say that this is a great recommendation and we should be taking it.
The recommendation is all we get. We're going to take a 5-minute break here, called the over 55 break. soon as Mr. Morani is ready, we're gonna, there we go. We're back in session on the Rancho Vista project. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and members of the community, tonight we're presenting a comprehensive report on the implementation of the Rancho Vista subdivision conditions of approval and a series of specific actions to keep the project on track and to accelerate the resolution of the city's water issues. When I was first retained as your interim city manager, the council made clear that you were asking me to carefully review the record of approvals for the project so that we could assure the community that the project was properly designed and implemented with proper oversight. An important aspect of that review was the extent to which proposed changes in the lot configuration in a specific area of the subdivision were substantially consistent with the approved tentative map. The home builder, Meritage, at the time voluntarily agreed to suspend construction on that portion of the site that was of concern. That was their so-called Phase 7, the lots on 3rd Street. They suspended construction pending a resolution of the council's questions. Tonight, I'm pleased to report that Meritage has modified its proposal for the area on 3rd Street in order to more closely conform to the lot configuration shown on the tentative map that had been approved by the Planning Commission. Under the law, the Subdivision Map Act, the map is, quote, tentative, precisely because subsequent engineering and diligence may require what the law allows, which is reconfiguration of the lots before the final map is recorded. The new proposal from Meritage responds to the community's concerns and can be found to be in substantial conformance with the tentative map. It provides for 5 home lots fronting on 3rd Street and retains the dimensions and size of the tree park shown on the tentative map to provide a buffer between the houses and neighbors whose lots front on Ahwahnee Street. Before the final map can be approved by the city engineer and presented to the city council for your consideration, it will be necessary for Meritage to revise the grading, landscaping, and public improvement plans for this area known as Phase 7. Other actions tonight propose to amend the development agreement with Meritage to provide for Meritage's giving us an additional $100,000 payment to be used for the water supply strategy that you've previously adopted. Other actions include the initiation of proceedings to take advantage of a statewide program that will accelerate the payment of their fees. Other actions include the initiation of proceedings to provide for the maintenance of the public improvements within the subdivision. And finally, an action to approve a reimbursement with Meritage for the construction and installation of a sewer main that is not directly serving their subdivision but traverses the subdivision. Council may wish to consider these issues and obtain public comment in turn. If so, we can start with the presentation of the comprehensive report and the revised proposal from Meritage. James West, our contract city planner, has provided you in the agenda packet his report on the conditions of approval, the mitigation monitoring plan, and a letter from Meritage that I think Mr. Jess Solomon, the Director of Forward Planning for Meritage, would like to present to the City Council at this time with their revised ideas for Phase 7.
Great. Any questions from the city?
Sounds good.
Open to the public.
Oh, well,
What? Okay, I'm sorry. You are the public in this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor West, council members, staff, and public. As the city manager outlined, you all recall that there were some concerns about the configuration that Meritage was moving forward with in our previous workings with the city. We heard that feedback and we went and met with staff and some of the council members who received that input. We also worked through in reestablishing the trust with council, staff, and the community in working through the project. So I think, I won't go through those items line by line, but you can see that there was an extensive process to vet all of those mitigation measures, talk through what the immediate impact and concerns of the lotting configuration out there, understand what they are, and then work to come to a resolution on that. As you can see, essentially overall with the site, the two primary area was the lot, or phase 7 over by the tree park. Originally we had some flag lots out there, which kind of allowed some terracing. However, there's concerns because that moved it closer to the adjoining neighbors and removed some of that open area. We worked through the site extensively. There's no other place to place that lot. Again, that lot was lost because over here, right here, we found that during the historic rainfalls of last year that there was excessive drainage moving through there. So to handle that and help mitigate the flooding that was occurring on First Street, we've removed that lot and put in some additional space to the project. Without that lot being placed in phase 7, we're essentially losing a lot for the project. However, I think this is working in good faith with the city and trying to come to resolution. You know, our goal here is to establish that we've been working well within the conditions of approval, mitigation measures, and in good faith, and we want to kind of get these items resolved tonight and be able to move forward with our project. I think it's going to be an outstanding community, and I look forward to getting it going. In terms of the phase 7, we're back to the 5 lots over here. We've made some adjustments so that we can fit the homes out there. We've brought them as close as possible to the street to give as much privacy to the neighbors. We've worked with staff to look at the landscaping that will occur in the tree park to make sure that there's additional tree rows put in there so that there's a buffer of privacy respected. And so I think it's a good configuration, matches the architectural design and intent of the Planning Commission review. So I think we have a good solution here, and it perfectly matches that tentative map property line. You know, overall, the project's moving forward. We've kept our commitment. We haven't touched the grading of those lots, and we've refrained from even paving over in that section there. I'm hoping to get this resolved tonight so we can move forward with those items. With that, I'm available for any questions that you might have, or the public.
Any questions from the council?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this has taken a while, but thankfully we're at this point. We've been able to come up with, or revert back to that plan that, because of the concerns that the neighbors had, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I just want to say too, Jess, that the city appreciates your level of communication and dialogue to try to resolve this in everyone's interest. You know, we're just looking for a win-win here, and hopefully we're getting close to that point. I had a specific question about the units themselves. Is there any issue regarding line of sight, 2-story versus 1-story, profiles, any of those issues that you want to address now?
So we, obviously light is always a concern. That's why we push those homes as close forward as possible. Our 2-story products, the only thing that will fit out there with the lots. So those are all 2-story on those 5 lots, even though the overall community has the mix meeting the requirements of the project. So again, we pushed it forward, and to help kind of mitigate that and be sensitive to the neighbors, we're putting in additional trees out in that in the tree buffer.
And the trees' size and species to be determined later?
I think we've provided something to staff. I think it's something like cedars, if I recall correctly, but
24-inch box cedars.
24-inch box cedars.
Okay.
Which is a fast-growing, larger tree. And I have to say, staff's done, I know that you guys have gone through some turnover and staff changing has been occurring, but we've been working with staff. Staff's done a great job of providing that, so we appreciate that. What always helps me is having a clear path forward, and so I think we've gone through those steps, and so hopefully that's reflected here in what we're presenting to you.
Any other questions?
I would just agree with Dan and Chris. Thank you for making the adjustments to make it work with only 5 homes instead of 6 or 7, and I think we appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Available if there are any other questions.
Thank you.
public comment.
Hi, Melissa Snowdy from 6th Street. So on D, and then the first one, review comprehensive report on, the second one. The amendment of the development agreement to provide an additional $100,000 contribution to the city to address our water supply issues. I'm just wondering how that correlates into the pellet softener plant, how much money is actually needed to get that built and operational, and if there's a way, basically, if that amount is less than what our city would need to make that, because I mean, we've had a rather substantial investment from my understanding, which is limited, but if that amount does not meet and exceed meet what we need to be able to build and have the labor to have the pellet softener plant up and operational, then I think that amount should be adjusted to do so, because that's, from my understanding, what's preventing us from having some type of filtration system. But I mean, maybe I'm just not getting it. I'm happy if you guys could clarify that for me. And then the other question about approve a reimbursement agreement for the city to pay Meritage for the installation of an 18-inch sewer main that may be somebody needed for the relocation of the wastewater treatment plant. So does that mean that they're going to pay to put in the sewer main and that we're going to somehow reimburse them for doing that? And then also, if we're talking about the wastewater treatment plant, is it the most immediate need for the wastewater reduction levels? And if we're going to be amending the development agreement to receive more contribution, I just am wondering if that can we address our actual issues through the amendment of this development agreement? Because I definitely think that there's just a way where it can make sense. We have actual needs in our city, like we need our pellet softener plant up and operational, and we need wastewater reduction. So how is it that we can receive new contributions and be able to address our issues? That's my question. I don't know, are you allowed to address me that?
Yeah, the city.
We're going to leave that to Ed for the moment anyway.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Molly has raised several issues that are addressed in the recommendations, and I can respond to each of her questions. My suggestion earlier was that we take each issue one at a time, get public comment on that before we move to the next. So I don't know if there are more comments about the proposed reconfiguration of the lines, but if there aren't, I'm prepared to discuss the issues she mentioned.
I see what you did there. I kind of spoke out of turn. We're only talking about the first one, and then we're going to have a presentation on each one after that. Okay, well, I've raised my questions, so if they can be addressed in the order that they come up.
Thank you.
Hard to hear you from the back. Thank you.
Do you have speaker cards?
I don't have a speaking card.
You just fill it out when you're done. Just so for the record, she knows who you are on the fly.
Okay. I have San Bautista. He did talk about the two-level homes in the site, right, or view. And I just want to say that a while back, a little bit more than 6 months ago, my husband and I did come to the city and we did talk to the former city manager, and he showed us blueprints and plans for single-level homes. And so my question is, where are those single-level homes if they're not on phase 7, in phase 7?
That's a question best answered by the developer. All right. Maybe you'll see that there are other questions before we let Johnny jump on it.
Okay.
Yeah, we did see the plans. He showed it to us. There were rolls and rolls.
Understood.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the part of the site and design review, the developer submits home types, and the conditions of approval don't specify particular locations, but talk about the distribution of 2- and 1-story homes. So you can't say specifically where they're going to be, but we know what types have been approved.
Okay. Are there any more questions on this particular issue of it? From the public, before we ask the developer to stand up and respond to it, let's get them all out so that he can do that.
Good evening, I'm Jim Pisano. Excuse me. I would like to express appreciation to the council and to the developer for removing the flag lots that were proposed at the last meeting. We think that's a big improvement. There are a couple of other issues that I would like the council to be cognizant of in moving forward. While the property line looks pretty much settled, we still have concerns about both the grading and the landscaping. Obviously, the flag lots will have to be regraded, and we have some concerns about the slope down towards the properties on the rear of Awani. So that needs to be considered. The developer also mentioned the buffer zone with trees and landscaping in between. We would like that to make sure that is done properly. No little saplings or little bushes. We want some big trees in there. And also, I haven't heard it addressed yet, but we're also wondering about the fencing, if there's going to be any kind of a wall or a fence, a new fence added on that back property along the back of Awani. That may be a consideration. And I also would like to second what my wife said just a minute ago. When we spoke with the former city manager, he specifically assured us that the houses on 3rd Street behind us were going to be single-story homes, and he showed us the plans for those homes. I'm not quite sure where that changed along the way, but the sight line is certainly a consideration.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question before he sits down? The one-story plans you were shown, you were just shown a generic set of plans that could be a one-story anywhere within the development, right? Or were you shown something that indicated that only one-story?
No, there was a big stack of plans for houses, and Roger showed us the ones that they were going to put on 3rd Street Extension.
That's the part that's critical, though. How did you know those are the ones that are going to be the ones? Someone told you that?
Talking about his word.
Right. So,
if I may speak up. Yes. And he wasn't alone. Matt was there too. So Matt, Roger, and the two of us. So they did show us, and they rolled it out and they showed it to us and they said, these are the ones we're going to go with.
So maybe one of the questions you might have for Meritage Representative Mr. Salmon is, at any time, is it true that Meritage planned on having only one-story homes behind your place? Because I have a hunch that that's not true.
Correct. That's what we were told.
Well, I know. I absolutely believe what you were told. I just think that there might be the unfortunate situation of you being told one thing, but that was never the developer's intention, or the developer couldn't even commit. As Mr. Tweez indicated, they may have said a certain percentage of our stock is going to be one-story versus two-story, but they may not have been aware at that time where the one-stories were going to go specifically.
Is it possible to let us see the plans for those houses that are indicated on that map?
That's a good question.
And when are those going to be finalized as far as where the single-level homes are going to be placed or located?
Probably when somebody pays for the house, buys the house, or commits to buying a house. Because they're not necessarily going to say, if you walk into a housing development, you can pick between, here's 4 plans you want on this lot. And then they have to balance that against the percentages of what is allowable. My recollection of the development agreement, I think it's in the development agreement, the conditions of approval is that no more than 70% of the lots can have 2-story homes on them. So if the first 70% of the lots, people walk in, want 2-story, they're going to get their 2-story, and everybody else would be restricted to a single-story. It's a little more convoluted than that, in that you can't have a solid row of 2-story. There has to be some mix in there. But they're not necessarily going to come to us at the point of a final map and say, this lot's going to have this floor plan.
Well,
I think. I won't speak, but he's nodding, so I'm pretty sure I'm right on that one.
Or Jess, maybe you can clarify this when he gets out, because I heard him say that those have to be all 2-story because of this.
That's what I heard, yeah.
So that could be a row of 2 stories all in a row.
Yeah.
So generally, I think you're right, but I think there, because of the configuration, they have to all be 2 stories.
Right.
I'd like to thank, my name is Doug Brothers, I'm on 7 Awani, I'm literally right behind those houses, so I'd like to speak on behalf of some of the neighbors that may not be here, but also want to thank the council and Meritage too for reconfiguring back to the original tentative map. I think that's great. I have a concern, and I think it's brought up a little bit, but there's quite a bit more dirt because of the second level that was put back in there, farther back into our backyard. So I'd just like to ask on behalf of Meritage to at least work on bringing it back to the original sloping that was back there when they put those lots in, and try to remove that dirt, because it's not the best dirt in the world, and it's sitting right out there in our backyard. So the other, people are stating that the original map doesn't show single level, but if you take a ruler on that map right there, the lots or the homes squares are 3/16 of an inch to a 1/4 inch longer than all the other squares on the other map. So it looks to me, looking at it, looks to me those are all single level. I'd like to at least propose that Meritage, on behalf of us neighbors and being friendly and all, and we certainly don't want to be upset neighbors or anything, but maybe they could sprinkle in half and half back there, so we all meet halfway, and yet we don't have something that just looks like an apartment building kind of coming across the top of the back of us there. But we work together on making and seeing if we could do half and half, maybe that they would be willing to go that route at least, so we're not just seeing a straight across set of buildings back there. But other than that, sloping, drainage, it seems like they're doing a good job. Some people, friends of ours, have walked the project and said they're doing a good job, so appreciate that. But maybe mix it up a little bit instead of all being two-story.
Thank you. Any more comment on that issue?
I'm Marta Gorelick. I'm on Alani Street, not right behind those houses, but across the street from them. And if I understand correctly, you stated that you needed 2 stories don't fit there because you need the extra lot.
2-story does only fit.
Only fits there because you need the extra lot.
The conversation should go through the council.
Okay, so I understood from what he said that the reason there's not going to be 1 stories is you have to have 2 stories because they need an extra lot because of a lot they thought they had, but from flooding they realized they don't have. And if that's true, I just want to remind Meritage that on multiple occasions, when we talked about this before this was approved, the issue of flooding came up, was very clearly stated by many, many people. I several times stated that my kids, my kids swam in that place in the winter. Not just one winter, but multiple winters. I know they weren't supposed to be there, but I did bring that up. Many people brought it up. It should not have been a surprise to them in any way, and I don't see why we all need to pay for that misjudgment. I think it should be 4 lots, spread them out, make them 1 story. They already are really high for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's always been 5 lots. Yes, the tentative map, this is not the tentative map hanging on the wall. This is a landscape plan. The tentative map was 5 lots, always. Is that not correct, Ed?
The tentative map showed an existing lot of record plus 4 new lots in non-Bridge Street for a total of 5.
Right.
Existing house that got straight.
Yep.
Right. So they didn't add a lot over here. They wanted to add a lot to have 6 in this zone, the phase 7, and they have now gone back to the original 5 lots that were on the tentative map, with the same back boundary, as I understand it.
Ken?
Yeah, Ken Schiffer, 23 Alani Street. I want to say that I concur with the previous speaker, that I don't believe that the city needs to be responsible for the fact that they lost 1 lot because of the flooding. I think there's been a very poor job done determining how to manage water on that site. And even the follow-through of the building that they've done up to this point, the culvert under 3rd Street, actually, if you were to take a look at it, you'll find out that they didn't even bother to remove the cement culverts that existed there prior to that. And it's unlikely that that culvert would flow the amount of water that would come down that creek, just because of poor workmanship. But I don't think the city should be responsible for giving them 5 lots. It feels to me really like a bait and switch type of scenario. This is what was presented to the community. We all came in here, we looked at that, and we said, that looks nice, and this looks, maybe we should change this and that. And now we're being told that this isn't what we're really going to do. This is just an example of what could be done. So people walked out believing that those would be lower lots, there were lower homes on there, larger lots, and not be a 2-story lot. And now we're being told that, oh, by the way, this isn't really that. Well, what about the term roundabout at the entry there? I'm really concerned that as a community, we have really no clue what's going to go in there. And that the city council has not very little clue what's going to go in there. The Heritage has decided, yeah, we're just going to put in there what we want and what we believe we agreed to, and it's going to turn out to be kind of a nightmare, especially the roundabout area and the potential flooding for the homes on Wally Street. I believe that they have really not addressed the flow of water in there. Every time it's been brought up, the answer has been, oh yes, we did. From the previous city manager, oh yes, we did. From Meritage, oh yes, we did. But if you look at it, it's very unlikely that they did. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
My name's Ken Hool. I live at 15 Milwaukie. I live right the back of my house is the Meritage neighborhood. So as Ken was saying, nothing has been done to the culvert, the existing culvert there. And what they've done is they've done a great job at relieving all the water from their property and dumped it into the culvert. There's been nothing done to the culvert. It's obstructed. It's extremely obstructed. Last year we had flooding. I brought this up at the planning meetings. There was a lot of flooding. My kids were able to do a river raft in that culvert. You know, I understand it wasn't safe and it probably shouldn't have been done. There's some serious obstructions in the culvert, and I really think with the way that the water's flowing these days, there's going to be a lot more flooding in my backyard.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. More comment on this?
Jeff, I wrote a list of all the questions as I heard them. Did you do the same?
Yes, I did. So if I miss anything, let me address it. Just kind of working through some of the items. The overall site, there were flooding issues. When we acquired the project, we went through our due diligence process. We discussed these things with the engineer, who is the expert on designing and so forth. That said, we still discover, this historic drainage event. We immediately took action on that. We began working with staff, our new engineer, redesigning it, doing hydraulic calculations to ensure that, one, we're not creating additional impacts to the surrounding community, two, that our homes that we're creating are being safe, and three, that we're not going to push that water somewhere else, so forth. In terms of the lot, essentially we are eating that. That's not the city's bearing that. Meritage is. So we've removed the lot because we found that the historic drainage moved different than what the original engineer had. Again, I want to remind you all that this is historic drainage. This was everyone's talked about for years. This has been a problem. We aren't adding to that. We're actually doing our best to mitigate that within the ability and the constraints of my project, of Meritage's project. So some of the things that are occurring, as I mentioned, that drainage swales being opened up where the lot was, utilizing the wetlands there, as well as the basin that's been increased in capacity to help reduce the flow that comes through. So even though we can't divert it somewhere or go downstream and change things, we have created more capacity on site so that when the water comes through, it's slow. Additionally, the outlet was improved to help direct it towards that way better. And so those are things that help mitigate the flooding. I can't fix, all the historic drainage issues within the city, but from within our footprint, we've gone through great lengths to improve that. In terms of dirt import, we have to go through all the required procedures for testing soil material, placing it to state regulations, and we have a geotech that inspects on site, so all that soil's appropriately cleaned and placed. So there's no concerns in terms of sloughing or drainage or erosion or quality.
Can I augment, because I don't think that really captures the spirit of the question. I believe the question was if the building pads themselves for these 5 lots behind the affected Creek Bridge people are going to be at an elevation that is now higher than it was at the property.
Moose.
So do not. I don't care about that. I just want to get sick. I think the question is
the shape and form.
No, whether or not these lots, the rear areas of these lots will sheet flow towards the Creek Bridge residents, or whether well, I know because we've talked about it, but I think the public would like to hear just address that issue. What's the drainage going to be like to the rear of the lots in the tree park area?
Sure. So that was a separate item in terms of the shape and form of the area. So the tentative map, this is very similar to what was formed on the tentative map. The existing grade of 3rd Street is quite high, so those lots were always intended. There's nothing that stated, hey, they're going to be suppressed or pushed back from the street and lowered. And so, there are balancing acts that we do. We pull those as far from the property owners as possible and push them down as much as possible, but we do need to make grades and so forth to be able to access those homes. They'll be coming out generally gentle slope out the back, and then once we get to the tree park, it will slope down. There's a low spot behind the residence, so there's a little bit of slope away from the existing residence, and then it takes it kind of north towards the existing drainage way.
What takes it? There'll be a V-ditch or a channel?
The low spot, yeah, the low channel.
It's going to be an engineered channel then? So
it'll be engineered, not so much that it's a focal point, but it's a low spot, so that way it's kind of matching the existing natural grade of the area.
It's not going to be a lined ditch then?
No.
Okay.
There's not a lot of water coming off of that. There's no concentrations. You just have some minor sheet flow. So relative to kind of overall drainage, it's quite minor and doesn't pose any sort of significant risk at all.
Minor or however else you would describe it, the intention is to catch that in this what you call a low spot, but it's an engineered low spot that's designed to carry or direct water away from these people's backyards.
Yes.
And towards an arterial.
Yeah, and our engineer goes through that process. I mean, that's a big responsibility for the engineer. At no point do they want to be taking water onto the neighbor's site because someone calls me and I call them and they're probably more trouble than I am. So that's all properly designed.
I have a question. How many lots were on the tentative map?
86.
And how many lots are on after the changes we've described that you're anticipating for the final map?
85.
Thank you.
And then to clarify the point, when we lost that lot, we had worked early on with the previous staff and had looked at placing that in Phase 7, and that's where that configuration, which previous staff had supported, unfortunately that feedback was, and that's what we're here revising. In terms of fencing, we put a good neighbor fence at the back of the property line, so that'll give some privacy. And then on the other side of that, the 24-inch box cedars that we've talked about, so there's a landscape plan that staff will ensure that we're meeting to provide that privacy. So they're quite aware of the concerns in terms of site visibility, and so that's the way we're mitigating these 2 stories. In terms of the 2 stories, so the overall site does have the restrictions of 2-story and single-story. There are single-story plans. At no point was it my understanding that we could even fit those on those lots. That's always been a tight lot area, so there's certain setbacks which disqualify the single-story. And so we didn't have any plotting for there. Now there is an overall requirement. We have lot fits, and we do, as kind of defined earlier, as we go through sales, if someone picks a single story, we keep track of that. If they pick 2 stories, but we track that. So if at any point we get to where we can't add any more 2 stories,
people are relegated to the single story. Knowing that these are required to be 2 stories, we'll have that plotted in advance so that way we can monitor that as we go through the submittal process, and of course the city's monitoring that as well.
So I just want to reiterate a point because I think it came up with the public. You said at no time did Meritage make a commitment or even plan on having only single stories behind there. Is that right?
That's correct.
So if someone from this administration represented that to these folks, that was not accurate.
Yeah. We did investigate during the...
Misunderstood.
During the flag lot, we did try to fit some 2 stories, and we talked about widening those to be able to fit them, but that hasn't, other than that, we've been a 2-story.
So Meritage never had a plan for single stories on 3rd Street?
Well, further down 3rd Street, there's quite a few single stories planned out there. And so we have a whole lot fit matrix, and so as our sales agents go through that, they can identify, hey, look, this lot can accommodate a single story and a 2-story, or just a 2-story, but we're also tracking, and the city is those 2 stories, so at no point do we exceed.
That would be beyond the bridge, correct?
Yes, beyond the bridge.
Yeah.
And that's a question about what sets the location. I think I covered everything else.
Sorry.
Explain to us why at no point in time when you said that 2 stories are required to be in the specific lots, and I'm just wondering why that is? Why is there not an option to have those be single
Honey, you can't, honey, excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
Jesus, don't do that, Jim. I apologize.
You can't help it, Jim West.
I know.
I forgive you.
Thank you. I do apologize.
It's really all right. My question is, I understand that it's at least these 5, he's saying that they're required, they have to be 2-story. Why do they have to be 2-story, and why is it not an option for them to change to 1-story?
The percentage of the lot covered by the building.
Because 1-stories are bigger than 2 stories, and because the square footage, I'm guessing, he wants to be able to fit 5.
It has a bigger footprint because of the space is all in 1 story.
Well,
if you have a 2nd story, you can have a much smaller footprint.
Well, I know that someone else in the public said, what about having 4 lots instead of 5?
They could, but it's a numbers game for them. I mean, every time he loses a lot, they lose a lot of money. And, I mean, the reality is, if they want to put, like on my house is 887 square feet. You know? When you start managing those size restrictions, they don't want to build a house that would be small enough to fit on that lot properly. They want more square footage, obviously, because they can sell it for more. And the contract that we all agreed to says that we didn't put a stipulation that they had to do 1 story in that area. That could have been a possibility, but at this point, that horse left the barn.
Okay, and there's no, because I understand, because there was 86, now there's 85, you made concessions for us, which we're totally grateful for. I'm just wondering if there's any possibility at all of having like good faith as a neighbor, that your neighbors are requesting that have not 2-story houses. I mean, it's not their fault that they were told incorrect information. It's not his fault that someone misrepresented, but how can we meet in the middle is only my question.
Or maybe Jess can address why they have to be 2 stories.
I wouldn't presume to answer for you, but I assume it's because, like the lady said, a 1-story home is wider than a 2-story home, right?
Way longer though.
But I'd also like to point out, and I know there are legal distinctions made between preliminary maps and approved maps and tentative maps, but on the preliminary tentative map from 2014, when there were 4 lots on here, they were considerably larger, obviously, than the 5 lots with the same property line. On this map, the preliminary tentative map, there were 4 lots ranging in size from 2,003 feet to 13,857 feet. And I'm assuming those sizes were large enough to accommodate the single story. Now we have 5 lots ranging in size from approximately 7,200 feet to approximately 9,000 feet. and those lots are not large enough to fit the two-story plan, or single-story plan, excuse me. So the change from 4 lots in the preliminary plan with single-story homes is now 5 lots with two-story homes.
I'm still confused about the 4 and 5.
Me too.
I see 5 lots there.
I have on that.
Can I see that, please? Can I see that, please?
I think that one didn't take into consideration.
The house was on the 5th lot.
The house on the 5th lot was a shack, though. It wasn't a big lot.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, sorry, I'm sorry. This is, okay. I understand. Yeah, gotcha. So now I understand. This is where certainly the confusion on my part, because I'm looking at, I know the tentative map has 5 lots.
When it was presented to the neighborhood.
Got it, okay.
It's changed since then.
Got it, thank you very much. Maybe you guys want to take a look at that.
It's on your website.
What's confusing to me, though, is the 5th lot hasn't changed the size.
It hasn't what?
The size hasn't changed on the 5th lot, the shack. That's what's confusing, so the 4 lots are still the same size, other than they're slightly smaller or whatever they're length.
If you look at the drawing that he just showed us, it is this lot 84 is dramatically larger than what's reflected on that.
That shrunk everything down.
Yeah.
That's right, Doug.
Yeah.
Well, like on our street, Milwaukee, we have single, double, all our lot sizes are the same.
Yeah.
So there's no wider ones for the single, and there's narrower ones for the double.
Sure.
So I think they could squeeze them in there, but that's just something the engineer should look at and determine whether it's possible. Because like I said, on that tentative map, the houses are bigger than all the other houses.
Gotcha.
And that's the single-
Well, again,
it's a long-
that's not the tentative map.
Right.
That's the landscape plan. That's not a tentative map.
Right. It would be nice if they could look at that.
We were sold on the landscaping map.
Pardon me?
We were sold on the...
Ken, could you come to the front, please?
Like I said earlier,
Doug didn't have to. You didn't make Doug come.
we were sold on the landscaping map, not on the tentative map.
Gotcha.
That's what the community's expecting. It's not our problem that the lot is small, it was gonna be a shack. I heard, or it was a shack, I heard that you guys were gonna remodel it. It would have stayed that size, and the other 4 lots would have stayed the size they originally looked like they were on here. So now we're trying to accommodate Meritage rather than accommodating the community. I think as a city council, you need to make a decision, who are you going to support in this?
I have a question for you, Ken.
Yeah.
Are you referring to this as the original that you were sold with? Time out.
A very similar version of this is what we were shown the first time Meritage came in and presented it to the community.
Okay, because the map that, I'm sorry, Jim has is dramatically different from this map, too.
Yeah, and that's so I'm precedes or subsequent to this map.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I'm trying to understand what you're expressing to me is that this map is what you were sold with, and sold on. And from where I'm sitting, that map is really close to this map. Is it not to you?
It might be, I'm not sure if it is.
I'm looking at them side by side, and they look really close to me. So in my view, it seems pretty, it's a pretty minor change in my view.
Yeah, I'm not gonna, I mean, it's not the scale, they look similar, but it's really the question of accommodating the community or accommodating the developer.
Mr. Mayor, at the risk of adding to confusion, but possibly clarifying,
Please.
we talk about the evolution of the maps. So in February 2015, the Planning Commission approved a tentative map for 86 lots. The map on the wall that is colored is not the tentative map, but the lotting pattern shown on that landscape plan is the same as the tentative map that was approved by the Planning Commission in February 2015. As I said earlier, it provides for one existing lot of record on which some people have said there is an existing home, and it provided for 4 additional homes. In moving from the tentative map, it's tentative for a reason. It moves from tentative to final by doing due diligence and possible minor revisions. What is being presented to you tonight by Meritage is 5 lots reconfiguring the 5 lots, the 4 plus the 5th existing one, reconfiguring those into 5 new lots. That is allowable under the Subdivision Map Act. And as I said earlier in our staff report, the revision that's in the exhibit behind me would be consistent with the tentative map that the Planning Commission approved.
Any other comment on this?
Just one more comment. Meritage builds many, many homes all over the place. I think they could find one of their homes that's single story that would fit on those lots.
My name is Harold. I'm a bit sick, but I thought I'd come down anyways. I wanted to thank the City Council and Meritage for making some changes back to comply with the original map. But I agree with my neighbors as well that one question I have first. What's the width between the 1-story and the 2-story homes? Because I've seen the models, and the 2 stories look pretty wide. If it's a question of width, I just wanted to know what those are about, the building path. Because these lots are fairly long, so I'm not sure if he knows, or if Ed knows, what the width is between the 1-story and 2-story.
Best answered by the developer.
Yeah. So, I'm assuming he'll answer afterwards. Another thing is, I went onto their website, and there's Meritage Cares. They obviously want to work with communities. It's on their website. They do a lot of work to give back to communities as well. That's inside. I think we're talking about one house, making this, like someone mentioned, one of my neighbors, not an apartment block in the back, because they will be perched higher than our homes back there. Even making it single-story, 2-story, a win-win for both, or if they wanted to eat one home. Again, it's a huge development. I think I'm in construction as well. There's ways to go about it. Like you said, this is a rendering. There's no final map yet for Phase 7. I think some changes could be made to benefit the community and to benefit Meritage as well, so it's a win-win situation for both. That being said, I think it'd be wonderful for the City Council, after this is tonight's, for them to talk to Meritage and see if some changes can be made on our behalf. I think Meritage has an opportunity to show their commitment to the community by making these changes that we've all requested. I think the 1-story is something that's been pretty comprehensive about throughout everybody coming up here and talking about as the main topic that they would like changed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ed, explain a little bit about the development agreement that we have.
Well, in the next item, we propose to amend the development agreement, but the development agreement is authorized by your code and the state law that allows a city to enter into an agreement with a subdivider, a developer of any kind, which has, from their point of view, the purpose of locking in the approvals that have already been made and the fees that are to be paid. From the city's perspective, we're able to negotiate for public benefits over and above those that would otherwise be provided by the project. So the development agreement that was approved by the City Council embodies the conditions of approval that were established by the City Council, locks in the fees at the 2015 rates, and provides, as we'll talk in the next agenda item, a series of payments to the city over and above that which they would otherwise pay.
Did you guys want to respond to any of this?
I think I'd be partly recapping a little bit of what I explained earlier, but yes, the lotting configuration here has always been tight, and working with staff, the trade-off was, hey, if we're going to go to the 5-lot configuration as part of the tentative map and not shift lots, the constraint's going to be the width. And so we've plotted the plans that fit their best. We do build quality homes, we build a lot of them, but that also means that the home has to live well and function well. And these are well-designed homes, and so to just kind of try to mix and match to push things this way and that way doesn't necessarily serve, I think, the community overall well. It doesn't serve the potential buyer, the person that's going to become part of the community. So really we worked extensively to provide a good quality home, a good design, and then we're also mitigating these concerns. So a lot of the concerns that are being brought up about site, we're addressing those. So they've been mitigated by adding the trees, pushing the houses forward as much as possible. So really, there's quite a bit of distance between those homes and the homes, the community members that are concerned about it. And I understand that they're concerns, I think they're valid concerns, but we've definitely stepped up the site plan in terms of adding additional amenities and accommodating that. So,
Yeah, but Jessica, you addressed specifically why a one-story home product, a one-story Meritage product will not work on those lots. Is it because it doesn't pencil for you square footage-wise?
It's too skinny, the lot's too skinny, so when you put a single story on there, you're going to end up getting with a long, deep lot. So you're actually getting closer to the homes, one, and two, you're just going to get a house that doesn't live well. You're going to have something that a buyer's not going to be interested in, and it's just going to not be a quality.
So we could think of that then, well, I'm thinking of it as I'm hearing you speak as a design issue, like the flow of the home will not lay out well because it's too skinny.
Mm-hmm.
How is the design different than with the two-story? Because you're able to move things around?
You're able to move it up, you're able to get living spaces on that second floor that accommodate buyers better. It's what people are looking for. It's what people are, it's functional, it's far more functional. So that's the reason that we need to kind of keep within good design sense. In terms of overall commitments, again, Meritage brought this project with an agreement with the city. That agreement was through a due process with the public. So people reviewed these items, and that's a part of the commitment. So, I have a commitment here to that development agreement, subdivision improvement agreement. I think Meritage is going above and beyond and being as flexible as possible, but that I also have to stand here and say, hey, this was a commitment from the community and the council. There was nothing in there that said this had to be single story right here. There's nothing in there that said, at some point we might come back and require you to change your architecture because whatever reason. I think we've gone as much as we can in terms of flexing to accommodate things like drainage and so forth. But there are quite a few conditions in there. There isn't just this landscape map. There's other obligations that we're providing, we're meeting, and we're stretching as much as we can. So again, I think we've addressed the concerns directly, and so I think we overall have a good layout and a good project here.
Any other questions? Go to the second section. II, 11, whatever that is. City manager? I did that already.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the next action item, the first was a presentation of Meritage's proposed revisions. I've indicated in the staff report that those, if presented to us for the final map, they would be found consistent. But there are several steps subsequent, and they include the resubmittal of a grading plan, a landscape plan, and a public improvement plan to reflect those. You mentioned in the last discussion, Mr. Mayor, the concept of the development agreement, and we're proposing here to amend the development agreement to increase Meritage's contribution toward the solution of the city's water problems by $100,000. A member of the public asked about what is the size of the water problems, how much is Meritage contributing toward it. gives me an opportunity to remind you in the community, at your last council meeting, you approved a water supply strategy that called for the installation and development of well number 2, adjacent to the Copperleaf, the acquisition and development of well number 6 on the Koch property, the installation of iron and manganese treatment on those 2 new wells, and the potential to install the so-called pellet softening plant. All those things taken together, hold your breath, will cost $2 million. Some of it has already been incurred by the ratepayers of the city of San Juan Bautista, and about 22%, I just did the calculation, about 22% of the total cost will be paid for by the ratepayers. That is because we borrowed funds to acquire the equipment, and there still remains $400,000 of borrowed funds to help go toward the pellet plant. So 22% of the total cost will be paid for by ratepayers. The balance of it will be paid by 2 subdivisions, Copperleaf and Rancho Vista. They will pay for it through their water connection fees in the case of Copperleaf. In the case of Rancho Vista, they'll pay for it through their connection fees of approximately $600,000, through a voluntary payment to the city of $340,000, and we're now recommending an additional $100,000 that would help go toward the water supply strategy. Specifically, that $100,000 will allow us to close earlier on the real estate transaction to acquire the site for well 6. And so we're recommending the amendment to the development agreement by which Rancho Vista or Meritage Homes will be contributing a total of $1.1 million toward the city's water solution.
Since when can you amend the development agreement? It's only by stipulation of the parties, right?
They're prepared to,
so
they've
are they
agreed.
getting something in return for agreeing to amend the development, that which is not amendable, a development agreement?
We've asked for $100,000 and they agreed to provide it.
Oh. So they volunteered. They're acquiescing.
Well, it's voluntary. I mean, it's a mutual agreement.
Okay.
Someone looks like she has a question.
Public comment.
So I heard connection fees, voluntary payment of a couple $100,000. Can you?
$344,000.
$344,000. So it's $1.1 million, the totaling amount of this development agreement. I'm guessing it's $1 million now, and we're adding the .1 in with this $100,000, or will it be 1.2 after the addition of this $100,000 contribution?
So under the current agreement, the so-called voluntary payment, the payment of public benefit over and above that which would otherwise be required, is $344,000. The water connection fees, which were locked in at 2015 rates, $634,200, and we are proposing to add an additional $100,000 for $1,078,200. I rounded it to $1.1 million. $1,078,200.
Wow, okay, so they're agreeing to pay an additional $1,078,000?
No.
Or no, that's the total of it?
That's the total.
After the fact?
Yeah.
So, okay, $634,000, $344,000 should equal
Plus
$1,078,000. And after, I'm just going to try and just stick to this $100,000 contribution to the city to address water supply issues. Will our water supply issues be addressed after this contribution, or will there be still something keeping us from having a working, operating pellet softener plant?
So the water supply strategy that the council adopted includes the installation of 2 new wells of sufficient water quality to meet the state standards and a sufficient water quantity to meet the standard, the state's requirement that we have a redundant water system. With the installation of well 5 and 6, we will have met the state's compliance order. In addition to that, the so-called pellet plant would soften the city's water supply, reducing the need by private citizens for private water softeners, resulting in lower discharge of salts into the creek from our wastewater treatment plant. So the total solution includes new wells and the pellet treatment plant. We are evaluating currently to what extent the treatment plant, the equipment that has been purchased, will still meet our needs here in 2018, whether any modifications need to be made by physically moving it from its location at the corner of Old San Juan Road and Mission Vineyard to the new Well 6 site, and to see whether it will still meet the expectation that having spent all this money will actually achieve the objective of reducing the salts in the city's wastewater. That's being evaluated now.
Okay, thank you very much for that information. So I'm guessing this addition of this $100,000 contribution, it will probably go more towards acquiring the 2 new wells to address the quantity of our water, and then the quality will be addressed when we have the money for the pellet softener, whatever.
We have that money.
We have it already.
Yes. We have that money.
We
saved a bunch of it, and we borrowed when we refinanced the bond measure. We got the other half, essentially, another $400,000.
Okay.
That money, we can't just go plug that in and build it. It's sort of dependent on some other steps along the way, including the 2 wells, the iron manganese treatment. This stuff all goes together in a plan.
Having sufficient quantity.
Not just the quantity, but having the stuff goes, it's like we can't build the second story of the house till we have the foundation in. That's essentially what we're talking. It's a step by step, and the pellet plant is a little further down.
Okay, so is it the opinion of, I guess, I'm asking staff, because this is up for the action of the council, is that amount that you think is sufficient to be able to add to to furthering a solution of our water supply issues? By that, I mean, is that $100,000 was that proposed by Meritage, was that proposed by us? Does that actually fit our need?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, $100,000 was proposed by me to fit our needs for the amount that is needed for the 2 projects. Why would Meritage agree to pay another $100,000? Because until we can solve the water quantity problem of having 2 robust wells that are redundant, we cannot lift the moratorium on new connections. They have an interest in having that solution proceed more quickly than it otherwise would. This $100,000 will allow us to make the down payment on the business terms we previously approved with Mr. Koch for the acquisition of Well 6.
And is there...
So it's not by any means arbitrary. I mean, it all fits into this very complicated strategy that you reviewed last month.
Thank you for that. My question is that have we done any research on if those hookups, if the moratorium is lifted, and if we do have these new wells, and I know it's a lot of assumptions, but they're going to be hooking up 85 new homes? Do we know?
Manisa, you're getting into stuff that, like the environmental impacts that were discussed, described, reviewed, studied years ago.
Okay.
And they're all valid questions, but the answer is yes. All that stuff was reviewed. The capacity of the system, the water system, and the wastewater treatment system was reviewed, matched to what was being built before those approvals happened.
All right. The next item on this.
We've got to take public comment.
I thought there was public comment.
Well, that was one.
One more. I just wanted to verify, and I don't know if anybody else heard, but, I was listening. Dan, you asked about the $100,000 additional that Meritage is going to provide, and I think what you said is they're just doing that voluntarily. There's no ties, there's no other commitments that we have to make as a city or as a council. So that's free and clear, $100,000. There's nothing else tied to that we would be bound to later?
Well, yeah, one of the...
Is that what you asked?
Basically, I started with the premise that a development agreement isn't typically amendable by a city, because that's why developers like them. It locks everything down. So my question to Mr. Tweez and City Attorney was, why is this one amendable to add $100,000 commitment by the developer to the city for the water issues, as Mr. Tweez has indicated? And as I think he just explained, they have an interest in doing that because they can't hook up their houses until this water problem is solved. So that's there in the city manager's opinion, and I think all of us commend him for thinking this way. They're willing to contribute towards that voluntarily. Otherwise, if they weren't so willing to do that, we could say, hey, I'd just like to throw in $100,000 to fix our water. They could say no.
Right, okay, I just wanted, because I don't know if anybody else heard, so I suspect.
Yeah, and it's an important concept, though, and I'm glad that you highlighted it, because it is, I think, them showing some good faith to try to help the city's water issues.
Correct, thank you.
Any more public comment? All right. Move on to the next item, item 3. City manager.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to take action on the water main?
Should we do that at this point?
I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we approve the amendment that proposed by staff, city manager, Mr. Tweez, to amend the development agreement to provide for an additional $100,000 contribution to the city of San Juan Bautista to address water supply issues.
Can you also authorize the mayor to sign that agreement?
And, yeah, as indicated by council, that the mayor be authorized to sign that agreement on behalf of the city of San Juan Bautista.
I'll second that.
All right, motion to second. Call for the question.
Councilmember Bach?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Freeman?
Yes.
Councilmember DeVries?
Yes.
Councilmember Martirana?
Aye.
Mayor West?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Mayor, our next recommendation, again related to the Rancho Vista subdivision, relates to beginning the process to establish some form of maintenance district as provided in the conditions of approval for a variety of services. This is similar to the landscape and lighting district with respect to the Creek Bridge homes, but more extensive. That is to say, more services are to be paid for by the owners of the Rancho Vista subdivision than are paid for by the owners of Creek Bridge. And I need to amend page 3 of my report. It talks about has 3 bullet points of things that are included. 1, street lighting. 2, landscape maintenance. 3, street sweeping and continual street maintenance. And 4th, the subject of a previous development agreement amendment, storm drain and lift station maintenance. So those 4 things are to be paid for by the owners of lots in the Rancho Vista subdivision. To get that process moving, we need to appoint an assessment engineer. You have a proposal in your packet from David Tossig and Associates. Their proposal is for $13,500. Our recommendation is that you appoint Tossig, approve an agreement with Meritage where they will pay those costs up front to be reimbursed out of the maintenance district once established, and in case there is a need for a contingency, to ask them to deposit $15,000. So items 3 and 4 relate to the establishment of the facility of the district that will maintain those services that I outlined.
So the additional services are storm drain maintenance and lift station maintenance?
Yes, sir.
As opposed to Creek Bridge, which is just lighting and irrigation and mowing a little strip?
Yes.
And lighting.
I said lighting. Oh, okay.
And that way,
And street maintenance.
Oh, street, okay.
Well, no. Creek Bridge doesn't pay street maintenance.
Rancho will.
Rancho, yes. Thank you. Any other questions?
No, seems pretty straightforward.
Open up to the public comment. I don't see anyone. Close comment. We need a motion on this.
Is there a... I'm sorry.
I move that we adopt David Tossig and Associates as the assessment engineer and for landscape and lighting district for Rancho Vista.
John, can we do this in one? With both these items? Approving the agreement with Meritage at the same time? Or do we need to handle
You
those
have
as two
them
separate?
separately on the agenda.
Oh, so we should do them separately. Sorry.
Put that as...
So then just leave it as I just said.
Absolutely. And I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second?
Ready?
Yes.
Councilmember Bach?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Freeman?
Yes.
Councilmember DeVries?
Yes.
Councilmember Martorana?
Aye.
Mayor West?
Yes.
Number 4, same motion.
Yes. Do we need to do the, this, we did both,
No, not
we
3 and
didn't.
4, so now we need to...
4.
Thank you, Mayor, toss me 25 towards that. Yes.
All right, on number 4, do we have any questions for the council?
There's, the staff report says $15,000, but the agenda says $25,000.
Thank you for pointing that out. An error in the agenda outlined, the staff recommendation is for a deposit agreement of $15,000. Thank you.
Any other questions for the council?
Okay. 15, no.
Okay, we'll open a public hearing on this one. I don't see anything. We'll close the public hearing. We need a motion.
I move to approve an agreement with Meritage Homes to deposit $15,000 to pay for Tossig's services. 15,000.
That's a mistake. It's supposed to be 50.
Meritage, and Rancho Vista, or whatever.
Which will be reimbursed by the homeowners who are included in the landscape and lighting district, service district.
Called an HOA. I think that's legal, isn't it? No?
No. Not an HOA.
Okay.
It is not. I've moved to approve it. Take a second.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Call for the question.
Councilmember Bach?
Yeah.
Councilmember and Vice Mayor Freeman?
Yes.
Councilmember DeVries?
Yes.
Councilmember Martorana?
Aye.
Mayor West?
Yes.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have 2 more action items related to Rancho Vista, the first of which you opened a public hearing, kept it open, on the question of should the city join and participate in the statewide community infrastructure program. This is a program authorized by the state legislature and, I apologize, not authorized by the state legislature. It's a program that is entered into among a variety of local agencies forming a joint powers agency that issues bonds, the proceeds of which go to pay a member city the fees that would otherwise be due. We mentioned an earlier agenda item, the water connection fees. There are all kinds of other impact fees and processing fees that can be financed through this program. Statewide Community Infrastructure Program, shorthand for SCIP. The advantage to the developer is that these fees are paid at lower interest costs for the statewide bond issue and paid off by the homeowners of the lots, people who buy houses in the subdivision. The clear advantage to the city is that we receive our fees upfront all at once without having to wait for them to be collected one building permit at a time.
And at the time that you first rolled this out, I could not see a downside to us in doing that. Can you?
I don't want to speak against my recommendation, but recall what I said. The payments will be made by the owners of the lots. So that requires additional disclosure, a little bit more complexity for the transaction when people come to the sales office and say, I like that lot and I want that kind of a house. And they will be advised, the real estate department will require them to be advised that they'll be required to pay annual maintenance costs, that we discussed in the previous item, and the payoff of these fees. So it's a disclosure item that adds complexity to the transaction.
As between Meritage and the buyers?
Yes.
Isn't the fee buried in, is not the fee buried into the price of the house?
No.
No, okay.
Well, Urban economists will debate to what extent the fees are capitalized in the value of the land or in the price of the house, but they will be disclosed. And so when a selling price is offered and a buyer accepts it, they will know what the total cost of ownership is.
If we move forward with this, this is not subdivision or property specific. This program would be available to Meritage. It, in theory, would be available to other developers. Is that correct?
That's correct, but so far only Meritage has expressed an interest in it.
And do those subsequent, if someone comes forward who then wants to do this, they still need the council's approval? It's not an automatic?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so this would be taken on a case-by-case by developer?
Project.
Yes.
Okay. So I was not clear on that.
Okay, that's a good question, yeah.
What it brings up is, say, for instance, they want to develop out there in the industrial zoning.
Right.
That owner could go to this and get all of his infrastructure, everything done.
Right.
And have lots ready to go. And which I think is the only downside to this, we get all this money and we don't start acting like drunken sailors. I mean, honestly, that's what Hollister lived on building permit money for years.
Gotcha.
And
well, I think we've shown the restraint, certainly in the last few years.
Well, you've got your finance committee, whatever. But that, to me, that's the only problem I see.
We're rich.
Otherwise, I clearly agree.
Let's go to Vegas.
And Copperly could come in and ask for the same thing.
Right, well, and is there a restriction in terms of the size of the project? Or, I mean, could somebody with a single lot, somebody like Andy Moore wanted to put the granny unit in his house, behind his house, is there a limitation?
There's a practical limitation because the developer taking advantage of this program has to pay the cost of issuance. So there's economies of scale, so typically a larger project.
We're doing it for a single home.
Yeah, I was just curious about that.
Any other questions from the council?
No, sir.
All right, any questions from the public?
I have a comment and a question.
Well, we've called for questions.
Well, I think there is a downside, and maybe not to the city, but there is a downside to the general public. As a home buyer, when the home buyer goes in to buy the property, then there's another tax they have to pay on the property. And so is Meritage going to decrease the price of the house by the amount that the homeowner is going to be assessed, or they're just going to get the market rate? And then they benefit.
You're supposed to address us.
Well, I'm asking Meritage this.
Well, ask us in the room.
Yeah, okay. Well, is Meritage going to lower the price by the amount of the assessment that the homeowner that's going to buy the property is going to pay, or is it just an additional cost that the homeowner has to buy? So there is a downside to the buyer of the property, I think, and that's what you have to consider.
Meredith, do you want to respond to that? You don't have to.
I'm happy to sit here if you want to approve it. Yes, so as mentioned earlier, the price is disclosed. That also means that when a buyer goes to a bank and they go to take out a loan, those taxes are brought into the assessment in terms of what someone can bear as part of the market. And so that does weigh into the prices. That will suppress the price. So we aren't necessarily, if market's here, we add additional taxes, that pulls the price down. Because someone goes through and a buyer down here, whatever price point, it ends up at, it's going to be affected. Just like if you had HOAs and CFDs, these things do affect the price of them.
Like a Belarus or...
Exactly. Yeah, same thing.
That's a salesman pocket. That's a salesman pocket.
Well, plus you get it at a lower rate. Let's go. You need to come to the podium if you want to make a comment. Or not.
Let's just vote on it so it doesn't.
We're going to close the public hearing. Call for the question here. We have a motion.
Not yet.
Who made the motion?
We don't.
No, we have not, we do not have a motion.
It's a resolution.
Where are we?
I would move that we,
Yeah, there are specific
It's a resolution.
There's a resolution.
It's under 5A.
Go ahead,
Okay, I move we approve a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Juan Bautista authorizing the city to join the statewide community infrastructure program, authorizing the California Statewide Communities Development Authority to accept applications from property owners, conduct special assessment proceedings, and levy assessments within the territory of the City of San Juan Bautista, approving form of acquisition agreement for use when applicable, and authorizing related actions.
Second. All right, we have a motion and a second. Call for the question.
Councilmember Bach?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Freeman?
Yes.
Councilmember DeVries?
Yes.
Councilmember Martirana?
Aye.
Mayor West?
Yes. Next item under this is the approval of reimbursement agreement for the city to pay Meritage for the installation of a sewer main.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you may recall that the general plan suggests, but does not direct, suggests that the wastewater treatment plant be relocated within the sphere of influence to the north of its current location. Not necessarily because of capacity issues, but because of community compatibility issues. Is it compatible with a community to have a wastewater treatment plant where it is? So the general plan said we ought to locate it sometime, relocate it. When the City Council and the Planning Commission considered the Rancho Vista subdivision, a condition of approval was added that required Rancho Vista to build an 18-inch sewer main which is not otherwise needed by Rancho Vista, but happens to be in an area that goes right through the middle of their subdivision. And the council came to the judgment that it was better to get that sewer line in now rather than disrupt their community years down the road when it was time to relocate the wastewater treatment plant. So the 18-inch sewer line is not connected to anything at this point. It's in a very deep trench that was constructed as part of all the other utilities that are necessary for this line. And a condition of approvals was that we would reimburse Meritage for doing that work now rather than having to do it later. This proposed reimbursement agreement would specify that we would pay them by crediting their sewer connection fees to the extent that that met the costs. If it turns out that the actual costs exceed the amount of the sewer connection fees, which is approximately $447,000, then we would pay them the difference in equal installments over the succeeding 10 years from others who connect to the system. So this is a project that is not, you often hear these developments talk about oversizing, where we require a facility to be oversized to accommodate others who will connect to it. This is not even that. This is a very large pipe that is being constructed now so as to avoid having to dig a 20-foot trench 5-10 years from now.
If the city were to ever need, to have a desire to move the water treatment plant.
Yes.
the sewer.
Wastewater treatment plant.
Otherwise, it's a sewer line out of nowhere.
And it's in millions of dollars.
A new sewer plant would be, yes.
Or pump it to somebody else,
Yes.
like Hollister.
What's going on, Grayson?
Yeah.
No, actually, it would be consistent.
This line would either accommodate the relocation of a wastewater treatment plant, if one could ever be permitted, or it could be used to connect to the Hollister plant, assuming we could overcome the challenges of gravity and the length of the line.
We're already committed to it, so.
Yeah.
It's part of our development agreement.
Yeah, we're sort of.
Any other questions from the council?
I think Chris kind of hinted at it, but when I first came on the council, I asked previous city management for an investigation of all possibilities of this, and that is something that needs to be done. Maybe not tomorrow or even 6 months from now, but in the upcoming years, that needs to be done. We need to find out what is the best for the future, because we are eventually going to outgrow that plant behind the cemetery.
It's not far off.
Okay.
We've discussed this at length, and it's not that far off.
So that survey, which is basically what I asked for, we probably need to get going on that pretty soon, but not tonight.
Yeah. Not tonight.
Any other comments from the council?
No.
Over to the public.
There's a comment card for Jolene. She's still here.
I'm still here, I didn't go there.
Yeah, I understand it a little better now than I did reading through it, the reasons for doing it. I still have a little bit of a problem with using all of their sewer hookup money, which is so badly needed to clean out our current sewer. I had no idea a line like this costs so much, and we may be into it for more than the amount of their sewer fees from what you're discussing. It seems to me that the Planning Commission did such a wonderful job with all of the 53 points that they made that the development has to comply with, and Meritage seems to have done a pretty decent job of complying with all those. Even they weren't even here when all of those were set up. They bought into it at a later date. And, there's still problems apparently with drainage and heights of houses and things, even with all of those 53 mitigations. I mean, that's just, isn't there 53, I think? That's unheard of, a lot of mitigations, I think.
Missed one, it's 54.
54, yeah. But it's hard to swallow that all of their things are going to that one line going through that we may never even use, instead of going to clean up our current. But I'm not sure there's a way around it if it's already in the agreement with them. That's all.
Thank you.
I just want to ask, with regards to the reimbursement money, is that coming from the townspeople, the 400 some? It's not?
It'll come from the fees that the Vernon will pay to hook up to our sewer.
The 100,000?
No, that's, Ed, would you explain?
Under the proposed reimbursement agreement, the actual cost of installing the sewer line
Is 400?
is yet to be determined. It has to be proven up as to what the actual costs are. But the Meritage will be credited, that is to say, they will not have to pay sewer connection fees of that amount. Their total sewer connection fees are $447,000. So Ms. Cosio's point was, that's money we could have used for other improvements to the wastewater treatment plant. That's a correct statement. But the council and the planning commission determined that this particular use was the appropriate one and put it in the development agreement in the conditions of approval.
So it's already done, is what you're saying? Okay. All right, just need clarification. And then I had forgotten to mention this. It's more of a research on your part. I want to kind of go back to number one about the Meritage's concessions with regards to the plans. As it was mentioned before, they build a lot of homes, and in Gilroy, they build, single-level homes, two-level homes, and it would be interesting to find out what size of lots those homes are in. And then with regards to Chris's mention a little while ago with regards to development plans and, they don't know which houses they're going to buy, I beg to differ only because, I do go to these development plans and they will have in the sales office, they'll have the plot and it will say the number of the homes and what kind of homes are going to be there, whether it's single level or two-level homes. So that's just kind of something for you to maybe think about before you make that as a final, is find out what those single-level homes are in Gilroy that they are building. Meritage is building there. Is there really a requirement that says you have to have this size of lot? Because they're building 6,000 square foot lots, single level.
Yes. Gilroy has their own formula for lot coverage size, separate from ours. I don't know what theirs is.
Yeah, but they were talking about lot sizes and how it has to be.
But the lot sizes and the percentage of coverage are rules that we in San Juan Bautista established. And I don't know how they compare with Gilroy's.
Okay, well, those were just thoughts that come into my mind because
Thank you.
have them. Thank you.
So, just for clarification, the connection fees of $634,200.
Excuse me, would you start the clock again?
Don't give me 10 minutes, I'll take all.
That was for water.
That was for water.
That was
What I
for
just
the water
heard
system.
is that the 400,000 something that we're talking about wastewater was included in the development agreement, and I was just making sure that I heard correctly, because it sounded like we have an amount for water connection in the development agreement, as we were talking earlier, to amend the development agreement, or to add the 100,000. So, the $400,000 for the wastewater connection fees, we're reimbursing them?
No,
They're not gonna pay it?
they're not going to pay it
Why?
because they installed the line as part of the agreement.
So they're trading, like, we're not gonna pay for hooking up our sewer because
No,
we're
no.
gonna...
They incurred a cost hooking up the sewer line. We, instead of giving cash out of our pocket, we said we will let you not pay the first $400 to hook your sewer up. If that covers it, it's fine. If it's too much, they'll owe us. If it's not enough, we'll have to pay them.
Right, do we know what the cost of installing the 18-inch sewer line on our own? We have no idea.
Not yet.
So it could be like $2 million?
No. There are standard engineering costs that you can go anywhere. It might vary by 5% one way or another, but they're standard costs. You can't, it's like saying I'm going to sell you a car for $2 million. You can't do that.
I think I can say without fear of contradiction that if the subdivision had not gone forward, it would have cost us more to construct it because we'd also have to acquire the right-of-way. And I can say that if we decided to construct it 10 years from now, it would cost us a lot more than Meritage would pay to get it done today.
Because it now has 300
Yeah.
Okay. I just, waiving fees for anyone in this town?
we're not waiving
Mandy said, we told them, you have to go build this. We wanted it. We, as the city of San Juan Bautista, said,
In the development
we're looking for, let me finish, we are looking forward, and we think that we're going to need an 18-inch line out to the city limit.
Okay.
You're going to develop this property that we're going to want to cross at some point, and it makes more sense to put that line in before we do all that construction. So we're going to get you to build that line in there for us.
Okay.
You're going to pay for it, and we're going to reimburse you for that work. But rather than us just writing them a check, they're going to owe us a whole bunch of money. We're going to credit the value against what they owe us.
Okay.
And I was one of the people that voted on this when it came up in the first month I was on the council. And we do not expect it to cost $447,000 to put in that line. I certainly don't, but we'll see.
So if it costs less, they'll still have to pay for the sewer.
The difference.
The difference between, okay.
Exactly, the actual cost and the 447.
So my prior statement about potentially having, my time's up. Reduce our wastewater. Get money from that. They're rich.
So part of my question was answered. The pipe is in. How come we don't know the cost yet? Why do we not know what the cost is yet?
Because engineering companies can figure that cost literally to within a few $100s.
I know.
We know what it costs to move dirt, we know what the pipe costs, we know what it costs to install it, and we put it back.
Well, then why don't we know? If you can figure it out, why don't we know what it costs?
We have an idea. The engineers know.
Well, how much is it?
I'm not an engineer.
Under the reimbursement, under the proposed reimbursement agreement, we propose to pay the direct costs only, not the indirect costs, that is to say, not the overhead or profit of Meritage. The direct costs, presumably with a subcontractor, and they will need to demonstrate to us with invoices and documentation how much they have spent on the project. They have an estimate, Mr. Myron and members of the council, when they initially started the project, that would have exceeded the amount of the sewer connection fees. But this is subject to our audit and review, and they have not yet submitted the full documentation.
Okay, well, that was my question. We're going to audit and review it and determine it's the correct amount that we're requesting.
Well, it's an amount that is out of our understanding. For engineers, this is pretty simple.
Well, hopefully we have someone in the city that understands it, because we don't want to pay any amount they submit to us.
Any other public comment?
I'd like to make a comment. Can we get a little credit, Bob?
What?
Can we get a little credit, Bob? I mean, Jesus.
But you're not being real clear to the public.
We don't know the information yet. We've said that. We don't know yet.
But you never said you're going to audit the bill.
Okay. Sorry.
What?
Any other public comment? All right, I'm going to close the public comment on this part.
Thank you.
All right?
Thank you.
And we need approval for reimbursement agreement.
Can you also authorize the mayor to sign that, please?
Yes.
If I could find the thing, I'd do it.
I don't think there's a document, is there?
I haven't seen a...
There's not a separate document, John.
Okay. Well, I move that we approve the reimbursement agreement to pay Meritage for the installation of an 18-inch sewer line via the balancing of the fees that someday may be needed for relocation of said wastewater treatment plant.
And
authorize the mayor to sign such document.
Need a second?
Second.
All right. Motion is second. Call for the question.
Councilmember Bach?
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman?
Yes.
Councilmember DeVries?
Yes.
Councilmember Martorana?
Aye.
Mayor West?
Yes. Authorization to purchase and install an iron magnesium water treatment plant.
Manganese.
Whatever.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this is a recommendation consistent with the water supply strategy that you previously adopted. Actually, at our last meeting, we brought to you some proposals from vendors who would provide a treatment plant that would be located either at the well 5 site or the well 6 site. It would treat water from both wells, however, to remove iron and manganese. Iron and manganese are not primary water quality standards. They're so-called secondary standards. But you and we at the staff are concerned that we provide water of quality to our customers that will give them confidence that we've finally solved a lot of problems. And so we didn't want to introduce iron into their drinking water, even though technically it would be allowed. So we proposed, and you agreed to install an iron manganese treatment plant. At our last meeting, we gave you 3 proposals. You asked us to pursue one additional one. We did hear from another vendor, not the vendor that we were asked for, but we are recommending the vendor who is ATEC, A-T-E-C, for a cost of $155,750. They are local, so in terms of meeting our specifications, meeting our timeline, and providing local support, we're recommending the ATEC proposal.
That's the one out of Hollister?
Yes.
So I feel that I need to explain to the general public what will happen. Once you get above 15 parts per million iron, your water starts to turn orange, okay? And when you go to wash your white underwear or white clothes, it will not come out white ever again. So it needs to be removed.
Any other comments?
I'm curious about operating costs, like long-term operating costs. Do we have any, what's the impact?
It's de minimis. Actually, the operation of this plant is not a significant operating cost, several $100, maybe $1,000 a year is over the last.
Okay. Well, that's good news for a change.
All right. Open this up to public comment.
Leslie Jordan, Monterey Street. I just have one question. What are the iron and manganese levels of the new wells?
City manager?
I don't have the well profile information at hand here. I can get that to you.
It would help, yeah.
So we know it's more than acceptable.
Over to the secondary MCL?
I'm sorry, people were waiting for me to find it. I do not have the information from me to answer.
MCL's maximum contaminant level, but there is none for iron. Okay,
so it is a secondary standard, and under the law, you're allowed to operate for 12 months before you test for this. We're proposing to initially install the plant.
It's a little step forward, getting a little better water in this town.
All right, any question from the other part of the public? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And need a motion on this authorization.
We authorize the purchase and install an iron and manganese water treatment plant purchased from ATEC for the quoted price of $151,750.
Let's go on the podium.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Call for the question.
Councilmember Bach.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Eric Heston.
Yes.
Councilmember DeVries.
Yes.
Councilmember Martorano.
Aye.
Mayor West.
Yes. All right. F, hearing for the removal of John Hopper from the Planning Commission with cause.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, so as you know, at the last meeting, you set a public hearing for tonight to hear whether the City Council wants to remove John Hopper from the Planning Commission with cause. And right after the first of the year and the holidays, a letter was sent to Mr. Hopper advising him of the hearing and giving him the reasons why. I'll note that the city manager had contacted Mr. Hopper immediately after the hearing in December and told him that this was going to be set for January. A letter was received from Mr. Hopper on Friday, and he asked for a continuance of this hearing. He advised that he had attempted to hire an attorney, and the attorney did not take the case. And he wanted a list of documentation specific to this matter. He wanted us to address how to handle ADA issues. He wanted a court reporter to be present, and he wanted the city of San Juan Bautista to start paying his legal fees. So on the first matter, I think as a matter of courtesy, usually with attorneys when we're operating and somebody asks for a continuance, we usually give them a continuance as a matter of right. This would allow Mr. Hopper to prepare as he asked for, to obtain the documentation, although I note that most of it was connected to the staff report tonight, and it would allow for us to give him the opportunity, if he wants to address ADA issues, to address them. I do not recommend that a court reporter be hired for this hearing. It's only a liberty interest hearing, not an actual evidentiary hearing, so I don't believe that a court reporter would be warranted. And then finally...
Can you explain the difference between those two?
So in an evidentiary hearing, we would be presenting witnesses and evidence against Mr. Hopper to show the truth of the matters asserted, and he would have the opportunity to put on a hearing and present witnesses and evidence to contest or rebut the city's case. But because a planning commissioner serves at the will of the city council, you basically only have to show that you are displeased by his action. He's not serving properly in his capacity according to the city council. So you don't need to put on an evidentiary case. You just need to show that you're displeased by his actions, and then he has an opportunity to clear his name if he believes that his name has been sullied. So that's the type of hearing that will be required for removal as a planning commission. So it's a very low threshold for the city council to make, just to show displeasure, basically. And he just has the right not to put on evidence, but to clear his name if he feels it's been sullied. So I do not believe that a court reporter would be warranted for that type of hearing. Finally, if you're concerned that we would have to pay his legal fees, that's not the case. A city is required to defend an employee acting within the scope of their authority in the legal proceedings in court. So this is not a legal proceeding in court. Mr. Hopper is not acting within the scope of his duties as a planning commissioner. And finally, you don't have to pay a plaintiff to sue you. You pay if someone else sues your employee and you're defending them. So this is not a case where the city would have to pay any legal fees up front to Mr. Hopper. Nonetheless, I recommend a continuance under the circumstances and ask the city council to make that decision. I think just for the proceedings and to give him the due process he thinks that he needs, I think we should give him the documents that he requests, address ADA issues, and set it for next month. So I would like the city council to first vote on whether you want to continue this matter, and then if you do not, which it's within your prerogative not to continue it, we gave him due notice. It's like I said, a low threshold for the city council to make tonight, and you could even put it over next meeting for him to make any kind of contention and defend himself, but you could remove him as planning commissioner tonight if that was your druthers.
Comments from the council?
I agree.
So,
ADA, is that?
Americans with Disability Act. So if you have a disability, then the city is required to deal with that disability. I don't really know the nature of that, and it's not something that we want to talk about in public here.
I would agree.
But it's a public
Not private medical issues. We do not want to talk about private medical issues.
We haven't opened it to the public yet. We're just discussing here.
And
we will open it to the public.
What I'd like to say on that matter, if you decide to continue it tonight, I would recommend that you don't open the public hearing, that you continue the whole public hearing over to the next meeting.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
If you decide to continue this tonight, I recommend that you continue the public hearing to the meeting in February, that you do not open the public hearing tonight.
Okay.
So you don't have two public hearings.
Correct.
Got it.
We don't duplicate our efforts.
Got it. I think we should. I think we should continue it, but I don't think we should proceed without him being able to defend himself.
I agree. Right, well, we have a concurrence to continue.
Okay.
Did you make a motion, please?
Okay. So what would be a motion to continue?
Minute order to continue, or?
Minute order. So do we need a motion and a vote?
I think that would be the best, considering the fact that we're making a record in this matter.
Okay,
It's an agendized item, and so waiving public comment on an agendized action item is of concern. You don't have to open a public hearing to hear public comment. There's a difference between those two.
Deb?
So that's technically correct. The public's allowed to speak on any matter that's on the agenda, but I think that because we're making a record, that you should technically open the public hearing at the next meeting.
This is public comment on the recommendation to continue the matter.
That's it.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, my comment is totally talking about the continuation of the hearing, which is the third meeting that I've been at this has come up. And for the sake of transparency, I would just urge the council to tell us what the actual complaint against the chair of our planning commission. You have not given us any cause as to why this is coming up, and I understand that at the public hearing, you're going to divulge all the information, but you haven't been very transparent with the public as to what's going on behind closed doors. And just in this, just insinuating to not allow us to comment on an agenda item is, again, not allowing us to participate in this due process. If you're going to remove our planning commissioner, I think hearing what we have to say about that, what our concerns are about that, what is the actual cause that you have against John Hopper in his role as planning commissioner. I'm not really concerned about anything else that he does in his personal life or in his professional life, other than what he does as a public official in meetings and in his capacity as head of the planning commission. So I would just like some, transparency and some explanation of why we're going through this process in the first place.
It is in the staff report on the second page of the staff report, as well as the public commentary that's connected to the staff report.
Okay, thank you.
I hadn't gotten to it.
Any other public comment?
I just had a comment on the ADA itself, since I used to be a law enforcement in the field. The ADA says that if somebody is treated different because of a perceived or an actual disability, then he's got costs for action.
Thank you. Just with respect to employees, clearly.
This issue has been up here for three different meetings, and I think that you all have become electronically users, and so I think that it's important to know, and as for the sake of transparency, to let the public know that the notice of the meetings are on the website, and also the packet, so that way when people come to the meetings, they'll have more information on what's going on at the meetings. The packet is there. It was clear what the concerns are of Mr. Hopper, and I really don't think that it should be continued, because it was out there, all the information was out there, and I mean, there's some of you guys that really believe in the electronic communication, so it was out there, and I don't see why you should continue it. Thank you.
So just to readdress my question.
Could you start the clock on that?
Yeah, start me. Thank you. Acting in excess of his authority as planning commissioner was reason number one. And two, failing to comport himself in a public manner which is deemed appropriate by the current city council. This includes but not limited to his appearance at October 24, 2017 city council meeting. So I'm guessing he approved as a member, he came as a member of the public. He wasn't actually acting in an official capacity where he appeared intoxicated. So does that mean that we have somewhere in our public code where people can't come into this office intoxicated? Right? I understand definitely officiating a meeting intoxicated, but does that mean that we're just saying no one who ingests alcohol can come into city council and give the appearance that they're intoxicated. And then also, I'm just asking for evidence acting in excess of his authority as planning commissioner. I don't know, does that mean excess of his authority while he's officiating a meeting? Is this when he's not, I mean, is there ever a time where he's not acting as a planning commissioner? Does that, I mean, is that only limited to when he's in a meeting, or is that like 100% of the time, anytime that he acts? You know, I want more specific evidence as to what that actually means. And if that's documentation, if that's reading transcripts of text messages and emails, I would just, appearance at a city council meeting intoxicated shouldn't be a reason to take a planning commissioner out of their duty, because they're not actually in their own meeting. They're attending somebody else's meeting, right? And there's been people in this room who the council has been forgiving towards the same appearance of intoxication. So I'm just wondering why that can extend to people in this room, but that can't extend to our planning commissioners. Thank you.
Any further comment?
I didn't think you were taking public comment, but I...
We're taking public comment on whether we're going to...
hearing, yeah.
Well, you've already continued it, right?
We have not.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, this is just about ethics. It's not about somebody's personality or whatever. It's the ethics of being on city council, being on planning commission, and whether or not a person should be representing themselves as speaking for the entire body when they are alone in public. And it appeared to me that's what happened that night, that he was speaking for the entire body, the planning commission this, the planning commission that. He wasn't speaking as a member of the public. He made it very clear he was speaking as the head of the planning commission. And it's an ethics issue, and I commend the council for taking action on something that appears to be unethical, because that's the very basis of ethics, is how does it appear to the public? Does it appear to be unethical? I mean, you have to recuse yourself from certain issues. It's simply ethics. It's nothing against a person who's volunteering, as you all are, volunteering to do this job. It's just, I don't know why it's gotten to be such of a he said, she said issue. It's, did you violate ethics? Yes, I did. Okay, I better leave.
Any other public comments? I'm going to close the public comment on the
continuance.
We have a motion?
I'm not sure we actually have a motion. I'm not clear on what the terminology that we should be using.
It's a motion, it's a minute order, basically.
A motion to continue the hearing for the removal of John Hopper to the February City Council meeting.
Yes.
Item 6F.
Yes, item 6F.
Yes.
Sure. All right, call for the question.
Okay. Councilmember Bach. Vice Mayor Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember DeVries.
Yes.
Councilmember Martirana.
Aye.
Mayor West.
Yes. Move on to city council comments.
Can I come up and speak? I'm city treasurer.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We did that.
I did that one part. I'm a working stiff guy, so
We have an agenda.
I didn't get out of work today.
I don't.
I already did that on the agenda, actually.
Go ahead and start the clock. No. First of all, I want to thank all of you for serving. It's a tough job. We got a lot of stuff going on right now, and I see it as the city treasurer, and I see the money, and I see a lot of projects, and I just want to thank you guys for doing what you're doing, because I know it's tough. I've sat there before, and, whoops, I'm up, no, that was my phone. Anyway, I just want to say that I've sent to Tricia an email, hope you guys got it. I just want to make a couple comments. We talked about moving some of our assets into maybe receiving interest bearing.
Say what I said.
And,
This is not, I don't think this is an appropriate.
Oh,
I don't think we can, it's not appropriate at this point.
okay, I thought you were going to push my agenda item to the end, so I
Didn't do it.
We didn't know that.
Resolved it, and we concurred that it should be moved.
Move, okay.
Yeah, to an interest-bearing account.
Right, just a couple comments. I need to make sure that we align our, whichever we do, is with looking at our audit and making sure that the things are in the right place, so we can make sure that happens.
We did all of it.
And if we did that, then that's good.
Yeah.
So you're on the committee that's going to talk about this?
Yes.
You, Ed, and I are on the committee.
Okay, so I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
If we're good, we're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, city council comments.
It's late enough.
You gotta learn time management.
I gotta learn not to run for office.
No comment.
I have no comment.
I'm sure I had one, but I
Nothing,
forgot
thank
what it
you.
was.
Yeah. Okay, city manager, you have a comment?
No additional reports.
City attorney, do you have a comment? All right.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
City manager. Assistant city manager.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye.